Chapter 2041. Cultivation skills were the divine power accumulated by a divine-level expert over time. Tianluan, divine power, cultivation, and divine techniques were condensed together to form a comprehensive battle power. During the battle, although divine level also involved many factors such as the way of heaven and the environment, it was mainly reflected in these four factors. Now, Qin Hao understood the importance of cultivation more clearly. If it wasn't for his shallow cultivation, he could have easily crushed the forest seedling in the Kunlun Sea as the way of heaven. Now that he had come to the Avicii divine domain and faced experts with deeper cultivation, Qin Hao's performance was even worse. He was beaten by a four-vein expert from the eastern immortal heaven to the point that he lost the ability to fight. All this was because his cultivation was shallow. If his cultivation was similar to his opponent's, and they both had four-vein Tianluan, how could he lose? So, he was obviously not convinced. Xin smiled and said, "Cultivation can naturally be cultivated. It will slowly accumulate in your Tianluan with the accumulation of time. The people you see, the things you encounter, and everything you experience can be seen as the cultivation of cultivation." Senior brother, do you really not understand? The cultivation I am asking about is whether you can use external forces to increase your divine marks in a short period of time, and not rely on time. Qin Hao was especially serious. If he relied on time, it would be difficult for him to catch up to divine king experts. Divine kings were born at the beginning of the universe, and their cultivation could be said to be terrifying. Hearing this, in the heavenly book hall, Tai Chu, Illusion Elder, Wuk, and the others all stopped comprehending and looked at Qin Hao in shock. Using an extremely short period of time to make the Tianluan produce divine marks, he really dared to think about it? Cultivation is an extremely mysterious existence. It is the proof of a generation of experts going from weak to strong. It is the miracle of transcending through hardship and life and death. It is also the embodiment of one's talent and Tao will. If it is really like what you said, using external forces to produce divine marks in a short period of time is too unfair to experts who have cultivated for tens of thousands of years. Xin felt that Qin Hao's thoughts were extremely dangerous. He pondered for a moment before replying, "That's true. There are indeed methods to produce divine inscriptions in this world. However, with my current abilities and knowledge, I'm still unable to comprehend it." The space was silent. Everyone in the hall fell into deep thought. But soon Chu Zhu, Qi Zhu, and the others shook their heads, thinking that it was unrealistic. No, it was too illogical. According to Qin Hao's point of view, an ordinary person who knew nothing about martial arts could become an emperor with a single thought. In other words, a heavenly wheel realm expert who had just entered the divine realm could instantly possess 100,000 years of cultivation? It was completely impossible. After experiencing countless hardships, tempering, and miracles of transcending life and death, the sublimation of one's natural talent and Tao insight to the extreme. Looks like one's cultivation isn't a product of time. Qin Hao tried his best to savor Xian's understanding of Taoism. He seemed to have found the key to it, but the thoughts in his mind were very vague. Third day of junior high. Si Huan stepped into the hall with a smile. Seeing Qin Hao fully recovered, he asked, "You recovered very quickly. How do you feel now?" Whoosh! Wuk, Huan Zun, Chu Yu, and the others immediately stood up and blocked Si Huan's path, their faces full of vigilance. Si Huan was stunned for a moment. There was no need to be so vigilant against him, right? "I'm fine. Do you need something from me?" Qin Hao's palms separated the crowd as he stepped forward and spoke softly. "Yes." Si Huan nodded. "Third day of junior high. You've just recovered from your injuries. It's not good for you to go out. If young Master C has any important matters like last time, I think there should be many people in the Sikong residence who are willing to help. You can look for Commander Zhang Tong," Xin said coldly. He didn't want Qin Hao to be in danger again. Zine Clanlord, you worry too much. This time, young Master C came here to bring Junior High to the Big Dipper Mountain to watch the ceremony. The grandson of the Big Dipper celestial sovereign reached perfection not long ago and forged a saint-grade heavenly wheel. The entire Big Dipper Mountain was filled with joy. They held a banquet to celebrate and invited people from all over the divine realm to attend. Zhang Tong's tall figure stepped in. Zine knew the background of the people of the Kunlun Sea. A few days ago, he had laid his cards on the table with Zine and the others, so he directly called Zine by his name. The grandson of the Big Dipper celestial sovereign broke into the divine realm and wanted to invite my grandfather, but my grandfather didn't want to go, so he ordered me to go to the Big Dipper Mountain. Zhang Xian will bring the guards of the Sikong residence to accompany third day. Si Huan said honestly. This time, he definitely wouldn't cause trouble. Ziyin and Tai Chu exchanged a glance with each other. The Northern Dipper Mountain stood tall in the Northern Divine region, and it was also a hegemonic power, comparable to the Western Capital and the Eastern Immortal Heaven. Although the Northern Dipper celestial sovereign was extremely famous, the ancestors of the various hegemonic powers did not necessarily have to personally attend his grandson's ascended god ceremony. In fact, Daisakong wasn't the only one who couldn't go. The Eastern Victory Immortal Sovereign and the Southern Courtyard's headmaster also couldn't go. I see. Zine nodded and looked at Qin Hao. Whether he went or not, he would let him decide. All right, I'll go with you. Qin Hao replied without thinking. This time, Commander Zhang Tong brought the guards of the Western Capital, and it was a grand occasion. The little tyrant of the Western Capital couldn't do anything out of line. I'll go with you. At this time, Wuk spoke up. Let Wuk go with you. Xiao Han gently tugged on Qin Hao's clothes. She was worried about letting Qin Hao follow Si Huan alone. Unfortunately, her cultivation was too low. Amen. Qin Hao nodded in agreement. Ha, let's go. Si Huan said happily and walked out. Zine gave Wuk a look, telling him to watch out and not cause any trouble. After that, Qin Hao and Wuk left with Zhang Tong. The Big Dipper Mountain, a giant of the Northern Divine region. This time, they invited many famous people of the Divine region. The occasion must be very grand. Qi Zu's face was full of yearning. A banquet hosted by a giant power at the core of a great realm would definitely be more grand than the one hosted by Kunlun. He didn't know how many Heavenly Wheel experts would be present. Focus on your comprehension, Zine said. He gently closed his eyes and sent his divine sense into the ancient book floating above the divine altar. This giant ancient book contained a wisp of the seamless Divine Master's divine will. Using it, everyone could comprehend the operation of the heavenly Tao and order of the seamless divine realm and integrate themselves into it as much as possible. After Qin Hao was injured and in danger, the Sikong manner and Daisakong's attitude towards them had improved a lot. The guards guarding the place where they lived had been dismissed. These days, Zine and the others could walk freely in the Western Capital. If they wanted to leave, Daisakong wouldn't stop them. However, Zine and the others didn't leave. They stayed in the Heavenly Tome Pavilion to comprehend and cultivate. Daisakong didn't ask about it either. Both sides maintained a tacit understanding. The Big Dipper Mountain. The Big Dipper family's foundation, the orthodoxy of the Big Dipper Celestial Venerable. The Big Dipper Celestial Venerable, Daisakong, and the Dean of the Southern Courtyard were as famous as the Eastern Victory Immortal Sovereign. Their status in the God realm was equal. They guarded the core of the Seamless Academy on behalf of the Sword God Avicii. Among the four of them, the Eastern Victory Immortal Sovereign was the strongest. He had 6 divine patterns in his heavenly wheel, and he was the strongest with his overwhelming strength. Next was the Big Dipper Celestial Venerable. He had 5 meridians and cultivated for more than 50,000 years. He was also one of the first people to witness the birth of the seamless divine realm. The Big Dipper family had always had a good relationship with the Academy. When the realm was first opened, the Big Dipper Celestial Venerable was also a supporter of the sword god Avicii. That was why they were able to guard the northern divine region and look down on the heavenly Tao of the seamless divine realm. Now that the Big Dipper Celestial Venerable's grandson had stepped into the divine way, the Big Dipper family had gained another core member. This was of great significance to the Big Dipper Mountain. Many forces and people of the God realm were invited here to show the Big Dipper's righteousness and express the Big Dipper family's attitude. Chapter 2042. The Western Capital Team departed from Sikong City. Daisakong had sent his grandson, Zhang Xian, and a large number of guards. This was a show of respect to the Big Dipper Mountain. Along the way, Qin Hao and the others encountered many cultivators from the domain of the god. All of them had powerful auras and were heading north from various majestic cities. Clearly, they had also received an invitation from the Big Dipper Mountain. Several hours later, the Western Capital Team arrived at the number 1 sacred ground of the northern divine region, the Big Dipper Mountain. Qin Hao turned his gaze forward. Up ahead, a towering mountain range could be seen towering above the clouds. Immortal clouds revolved around it, exuding a majestic aura. Every divine peak seemed to be covered in gold, flickering with resplendent golden light, exuding a noble aura. It was like an immortal mountain, surging with waves of magnificence. Among the countless mountains, there were 3 that were the tallest. They stood at the center of the mountain range, and were surrounded by thousands of mountains. From afar, they looked like 3 chairs placed there. The central peak is the exalted celestial peak, the Tao peak of the Big Dipper Celestial Sovereign. Only the upper echelons of the Big Dipper family are allowed to enter. The left and right peaks are controlled by the Big Dipper family patriarch and great elder respectively. Those who live there are also the core disciples of the Big Dipper Mountain. Zhang Xian pointed to the front and explained. The Big Dipper Celestial Sovereign cultivated a powerful mountain-moving divine ability. There were countless mountains in the land of the Big Dipper Mountain, and the 3 peaks were the core. The closer one was to the periphery, the lower one's status would be. Qin Hao nodded. From this, one could see that the Big Dipper Mountain's hierarchy was quite severe. However, today was the day of the Big Dipper Celestial Sovereign's grandson's High God Advancement ceremony, so the disciples would gather temporarily to strengthen their influence. "Let's go," Zhang Xian said. He led the Western Capital Team to the exalted celestial peak at the center of thousands of mountains. Daisakong's reputation and status in the God realm were on par with the Big Dipper Celestial Sovereign. In fact, they were closer to the Divine Master than the Big Dipper Celestial Sovereign, so there was no need to hide anything. On the other hand, the other cultivators of the God realm all lowered their heads after entering the Big Dipper Mountain. The weaker they were, the lower they flew to express their respect for the Big Dipper Celestial Sovereign. At this time, the exalted celestial peak was bustling with noise and excitement. An incomparably vast Taoist field was set up under the celestial venerable hall. On the left and right sides of the Taoist field was a celestial river. The sparkling and translucent river water flowed rapidly, filled with lush spiritual qi. It circled around the Taoist field, then flowed towards the 1,000 mountains, and finally circled around the entire Big Dipper Mountain. However, there were not many people who could stand in the celestial worthy palace. There were only a few dozen figures. It was obvious that not everyone could enter this palace. Below the training hall was a long flight of stairs that extended from the clouds to the ground. There were many people standing on the stairs. They were all disciples of the Big Dipper Mountain. Viewing platforms were set up on both sides of the stairs. Although the area was not as vast as the training hall, it was enough to accommodate hundreds of people. A viewing platform like this was divided into many levels, one after another, from the clouds down the stairs. At this time, the cultivators from all over the God realm were being received by the disciples of the Big Dipper Mountain. They landed on the viewing platforms on both sides of the stairs and looked up at the celestial worthy palace. The seamless divine realm was the core of the sword realm. There were countless experts and aristocratic families. Naturally, not everyone had the opportunity to approach the Big Dipper celestial sovereign. This depended on the background of the aristocratic family and the strength of the individual. The stronger one's cultivation was, the higher the viewing platform was arranged. On the other hand, those without any fame would be infinitely close to the lowest level. They wouldn't even have a seat. They could only stand and watch today's banquet. The immortal divine sovereign has arrived. As a particularly powerful aura descended, a disciple of the Big Dipper Mountain loudly shouted. Soon, a heavenly wheel elder appeared from the Big Dipper Mountain to welcome the immortal divine sovereign. He personally stood above the training hall, his position extremely close to the celestial worthy palace. The sect master of the Hidden Pill sect, the Hidden Divine Sovereign, has arrived. Divine Sovereign, please take a seat. The sect master of the Secluded Spring sect has arrived. The Soaring Cloud sect has arrived. The Shwani Taoist has arrived. Loud and clear names were spread. The entire Big Dipper Mountain's atmosphere was like a tide. The experts were all welcomed into the training hall. These heavenly wheel experts, sect masters, and sect masters were all qualified to be close to the Big Dipper celestial sovereign. He-sun, the revered crane, has arrived. A disciple shouted. Haha, brother, he has arrived. Quickly, invite him in. On the stairs, a fat attendant of the Big Dipper Mountain came to welcome him. How can I, He-sun, be absent from the grand banquet of the Gene God, the grandson of the celestial sovereign? This is a bottle of divine pills that I have prepared for young Master E. Please kindly accept it. He-sun took out the divine pills he had refined. Brother, he is too polite. Please take a seat. The plump deacon accepted the gift with a smile and led the way for He-sun, bringing him to a viewing platform at the bottom of the stairs. There were already quite a number of people seated here. When they saw He-sun, they all greeted him, and He-sun responded with a smile. Although this viewing platform was located below the training hall, it was not far from the Celestial Sovereign Temple. After all, they were all people who had forged the heavenly wheel and were all powerhouses of the divine path. Unfortunately, like He-sun, they did not have a strong background. Compared to the sect masters, and patriarchs above, their status was naturally lower. Regardless of whether it was He-sun or the others, they did not show any dissatisfaction. In terms of strength, they were actually not as strong as the people sitting in the training hall. This was something they still knew. Buzz! A strong movement came from the void. In the distance, a large group of people spread out in a black mass. There were many figures. They are cultivators from the South Academy. Someone said with a respectful expression. The South Academy stood in the south of the divine realm. It was like the Big Dipper Mountain that dominated the area. Today, they sent so many people to observe the ceremony. It was enough to show their respect for the Big Dipper celestial sovereign. Friends of the South Academy, please take a seat. At this time, a middle-aged man standing in the training hall said kindly. His whole body exuded the aura of dragons and tigers, giving people a strong pressure. It was the Big Dipper clan's patriarch, the son of the celestial sovereign, the Big Dipper divine sovereign. How can we be absent from the celestial sovereign's invitation? This is a gift that my master ordered me to prepare. The group from the South Academy directly landed on the training hall from the sky. An extremely old elder waved his hand. Immediately, several disciples of the South Academy walked out, each holding a divine sword in their hands. There were a total of 3 swords, and they presented them in front of the Big Dipper celestial sovereign. Come, take it. The Big Dipper celestial sovereign laughed. The divine weapons produced by the South Academy had always been well received in the divine realm. At this moment, in the void, another group of figures appeared. They were like dancing snow. When they approached the celestial sovereign peak, the temperature instantly dropped a lot. The fairies of the eastern immortal heaven have arrived. Many cultivators on the grandstand stood up and looked at the fairies with veiled faces in the 9 heavens, showing strong admiration. "Fairies, please take a seat," the Big Dipper celestial sovereign said happily. "My master can't come in person because of some matters. He specially ordered me to present a celestial stamen." The person who led the group from the eastern immortal heaven here was the woman in green who had defeated Qin Hao with one palm. In addition, the woman in yellow was also present. They all wore veils and gave people a cold feeling that they were otherworldly. "Thank you, Senior Immortal Dongxing." The Big Dipper celestial sovereign personally stepped forward to receive the celestial stamen from the eastern immortal heaven. He was very excited. He knew that the celestial stamen of the eastern immortal heaven had absorbed the essence of the icefall. It was condensed from immortal Dongxing's will. If others refined it, it would be of great help to their cultivation. "I am Big Dipper E. Thank you, Senior Qing Rong." A young man stepped out from beside the Big Dipper celestial sovereign. He had handsome features and a natural arrogance. He thanked the woman in green. Qing Rong was the eldest direct disciple of immortal Dongxing. It was said that she was also his only disciple so far. It was rumored that not only was she as beautiful as a fairy, but her strength was also the best in the divine realm. She was faintly showing signs of catching up to the current 4 giants. Some people even said that her strength was already comparable to the current 4 giants of the divine realm. Today, Fairy Qing Rong had personally come to observe the ceremony. How could the Big Dipper clan not be excited? The Big Dipper hierarch knew very well that Qing Rong's future potential was boundless. It could even be said that among all the people present today, besides his father, the Big Dipper hierarch, Fairy Qing Rong's cultivation was the strongest. "Young master E is too polite." Qing Rong softly spoke. Her voice was extremely melodious. After that, she brought the fairies from the eastern celestial immortal realms to sit at the highest point of the Tao Plaza, together with a member of the Southern Academy. Their seats were close to the entrance of the celestial deity hall. "Big Dipper righteousness, I'm here." The people of the eastern immortal heavens had just sat down when suddenly, a loud shout rang out, extremely ear-piercing and filled with disrespect. On the crowded celestial worthy peak, every cultivator on the viewing platform looked towards the source of the voice. Who was so audacious as to call himself the father of today's main character, Big Dipper E? Chapter 2043. On the exalted celestial peak, the disciples of the Big Dipper mountain were enraged. The Big Dipper patriarch's expression changed as well. However, after seeing who it was, the Big Dipper patriarch's expression slowly faded. Western Capital. Little Overlord Si Huan. Many disciples of the Big Dipper mountain discussed softly. For a moment, the people from the various forces looked at the red curly hair floating in the wind and revealed deep fear. The little overlord of the Western Capital was infamous. Who in the divine realm didn't know him? Even the naughty girls over the age of 16 in the outer regions of the divine realm would use the little overlord's name to threaten them when they angered their elders, claiming that they would be sent to the Sikong residence as maids. Every time this happened, the girls would restrain themselves and become obedient and sensible. From this, it could be seen how powerful Si Huan's deterrence was. Big Dipper Patriarch, Young Master E, this is a gift from my master, Sikong Ming. The Western Capital's team landed directly on the training hall from the sky without any hesitation. Zhang San waved his hand, and the guards of the Western Capital came forward with rare divine stones and luminous pearls. "Thank you, Commander Zhang San." The Big Dipper Patriarch thanked him. He glanced at Si Huan and smiled. Nephew Si Huan is actually in the mood to come personally. This is beyond my expectations. Ha ha ha. Big Dipper's nomological laws have reached perfection and stepped into the divine realm. Of course I'll come to support you, right? Si Huan laughed loudly at Big Dipper Patriarch. He muttered in his heart, since my grandfather has spoken, I have to come even if I don't want to. Take a seat, the Big Dipper Patriarch said. Zhang San nodded slightly and led the Western Capitals team to one side of the training hall, right next to the exalted Celestial Hall. Coincidentally, they were sitting in the same area as Eastern Celestial Peak and Fairy Qingrong. Si Huan, behave yourself today. Big Dipper Patriarch secretly transmitted his voice, afraid that he would disturb the Big Dipper Mountain. So what if I don't behave? Are you messing with me? Si Huan swaggered into the seat with his hands behind his back, not caring about Big Dipper Patriarch's feelings. Commander Zhang San, how is Senior Sikong doing? As the Western Capitals team took their seats, Fairy Qingrong asked. My master Sikong is still fine. A wisp of embarrassment flashed through his face, and he faintly didn't dare look Qin Shi in the eye. Fairy Qingrong nodded and said, but my Eastern Sky Celestial Sect hasn't been doing well recently. Thieves have appeared and caused chaos in the Holy Land, causing people to be unable to rest in peace. What does Commander Zhang Kuei think about this? Which scoundrel is so daring to disturb the venerable immortal's cultivation? He must be severely punished. Zhang Xian said righteously. I, Qingrong, have no idea where that scoundrel came from because I killed him on the spot. The God Lord handed the deity realm to us, the four great orthodoxies, to manage. For the past 100 years, the peaceful environment of the deity realm might have boosted the arrogance of that scoundrel. He actually dared to attack our Eastern Celestial Immortal Heaven, as though he had forgotten the divine might of our esteemed master back then. I, Qingrong, will definitely not tolerate such reckless people. Fairy Qingrong said and deliberately stared at Si Huan. Her stare made Si Huan shiver a few times, and a hint of fear appeared in his eyes. That's right, that's right. Zhang Kuei rubbed his forehead as though he was wiping off sweat. This is strange. Scoundrels actually appeared in the Eastern Celestial Immortal Heaven to cause chaos. Do we need the southern courtyard to send people to set up a formation? At this moment, a sentence came from the opposite side. It came from a refined young man from the southern courtyard. This young man's seat was close to the leading elder of the southern courtyard. Many heavenly wheel experts with stronger auras than him were also sitting behind the young man, making him seem especially extraordinary. The scoundrels have been killed by me. There's no need for the number one person of the southern courtyard to take action. I just hope there won't be a next time, right, Commander Zhang Kuei? Fairy Qingrong said with a smile. Yes, yes. Zhang Kuei nodded repeatedly. His body was very low, as though he was under great pressure. Nangong Miao, the new heavenly wheel expert of the southern courtyard. He's the direct disciple of the dean and is at the saint level. Si Huan silently explained to Qin Hao beside him. He glanced at Nangong Miao and continued, this person is extremely arrogant and thinks that he's the number one person of the current generation in the divine plane. In his words, after entering the academy, he can also stand side by side with the core disciples. The Seamless Academy was the symbol of the divine plane and the absolute core of the Sword Realm. The experts gathered there were the first-generation elders who followed the Divine Master when he opened up the great world. The talents that could be accepted by the Academy were very strong. It was hard to find one in a few hundred years. Nangong Miao said that he could stand side by side with the core disciples of the Academy. How confident was that? In fact, among the disciples of the aristocratic sect in the divine plane, Si Huan's attitude towards Nangong Miao was the most unpleasant. Firstly, he was too arrogant. Secondly, he might be jealous. After all, Si Huan and Nangong Miao were of the same generation, but their cultivation was inferior. Now, Beidou Skylord's grandson, Beidou Yi, had also stepped into the divine plane. Si Huan and Shi Du were in an extremely awkward situation. Confidence is a good thing, but blind confidence is stupid, Wuk said. From some simple conversations, one could see Nangong Miao's personality. For example, when facing Fairy Clearbrow of Eastern Celestial Heaven, Nangong Miao didn't refer to himself as a junior. It was as if he had placed himself at the same level as Fairy Clearbrow. Take care of yourself. It's fine as long as we don't act blindly, Qin Hao said. Sensing the aura emitted from Fairy Clearbrow, he could already confirm that the person who had knocked him unconscious with a single palm strike was this powerhouse. On the Tao field, the disciples of the four great influences of the divine plane chatted with each other. The atmosphere was harmonious, although Fairy Clearbrow's words contained a faint hint of mockery. Besides Zhang San and the others, no one else could understand the underlying meaning. Time slowly passed. More and more cultivators rushed to Big Dipper Mountain, and the scene became increasingly grand. But what was surprising was that Beidou Skylord still hadn't appeared. Many people knew that the Skylord was still waiting for someone. They're here. Fairy Clearbrow looked in a certain direction, her beautiful eyes flashing. It was as if she could feel an extremely shocking force rapidly approaching. Zhang San, the Big Dipper clan leader, and the leading elder of the Southern College also looked in the same direction. They also felt the powerful aura. Seamless Academy's elder Severing Love has arrived. An incomparably solemn shout rang out. In an instant, all the cultivators on Celestial Mountain stood up at the same time. They cupped their hands and said in unison, "Greetings to Elder Severing Love." Buzz. An incomparably dazzling divine light descended, bringing powerful figures into the center of the Tao field. As the light gradually dissipated, a group of people with extraordinary auras was revealed. The elders and disciples of the Seamless Academy had arrived. The celestial bloodline has gained another divine path cultivator. Old Man Severing Love, representing the sword gods of the Academy to celebrate. A deep voice came from a tall old man at the front of the Academy's team. His voice was exceptionally loud. This old man wore a plain gray robe with an ordinary ribbon tied around his waist. His face was very kind, but his entire body exuded an extraordinary aura. After a glance, people couldn't help but feel a sense of respect. This old senior's sword will is so powerful. Wuk's eyes flashed. When the old man appeared in front of him, he felt the sword will of all creations in his body become restless. It was as if it was affected by the old man's aura. Faintly, it resonated with the sword will of all creations. Not only Wuk, but all the swordsmen present felt this, including Qin Hao. Traces of light of calamity flowed along their bodies, as if they would fly to the old man's body at any time and merge with his aura. Sword God Severing Love, a supreme expert of the same generation as the Divine Master. He joined forces to create the Seamless Academy. He has 6 meridians and is at the saint level. There are at least 5 experts like Elder Severing Love in the Academy. Young Master Chu San, Wuk, quickly come forward to greet him. Zhang San hurriedly said and quickly stepped forward. Just as Zhang San moved, Goddess Qing Rong and the leading elder of the Southern Academy did not dare to delay. They hurriedly got up and came in front of Elder Severing Love together. Everyone bowed and said, "Sikong of the West Capital, Zhang San. Eastern Celestial Heaven, Qing Rong. Southern Academy, Qing Huai. Big Dipper Mountain, Big Dipper Jichang. Greetings to Elder Severing Love." The 4 of them bowed at the same time with an extremely respectful attitude. The sword god Severing Love in front of them was not only powerful, but also had an extremely high seniority. The reason why the Seamless Divine Domain was able to survive until now was because of Severing Love. He was one of the founding elders of the Sword World along with Sword God Severing Love. Qin Hao, Si Huan, Wuk, Nangong Miao, Beidou Yi, and the yellow-robed woman from the eastern celestial heaven followed closely behind Zhang San and the others and bowed to express their heartfelt respect for the old man. You may all rise. Elder Zhang Qing smiled amiably. His gaze swept over Zhang Xian and the others, looking very amiable. These people were all his juniors, the children of the Seamless Academy. Zhang San was Daisakong's confidant, Qing Rong was the direct disciple of the Eastern Celestial Lord, Nangong Miao was the strongest person in the Southern Academy, and Beidou Jichang was the son of the Celestial Lord. Greetings, Grandpa Severing Love. Si Huan squeezed in from the back and stood obediently in front of the old man. Elder Severing Love raised his hand and patted Si Huan's head. A layer of divine light appeared from the old man's palm and filtered Si Huan's body. And your cultivation has improved. Si Huan, you have to work hard. Don't disgrace your grandfather and parents. And, after being baptized by Elder Severing Love's sword intent, Si Huan felt incomparably comfortable and nodded vigorously. Qing Rong, you are about to form the fifth meridian, right? Elder Severing Love asked. Qing Rong replied, Senior's memory is very clear. In another 100 years, I will be able to form the fifth meridian. Hiss. At the side, Qin Hao sucked in a breath of cold air. Forming the fifth meridian, a heavenly wheel expert who had cultivated for 50,000 years. That palm strike, it wasn't unjust for him to lose. Loi, quickly come and greet Senior Severing Love. At this moment, Qing Rong waved towards her yellow-robed junior sister. Following which, the yellow-robed junior sister stepped forward and said, Junior Loi greets Senior. Could it be that this junior is? Old man Severing Emotions looked at her, as if he had guessed something. His eyes flashed with astonishment as he looked at Fairy Qing Rong. Fairy Qing Rong smiled and nodded in response to the old man's guess. Good, good. In the future, the Seamless Sword world will have your inheritance. A bunch of old bones can retire. Ha! Elder Severing Love laughed happily. You're right. We should retire and leave the sword world to them. Ha ha! Severing Love, I didn't expect you to come today. A hearty laughter rang out from the majestic, exalted celestial palace. A powerful figure stepped out. He wore a jade crown and a Taoist robe. He walked lightly towards Severing Love. However, every step he took was like a giant mountain pressing down on the hearts of everyone on the Tao Peak, giving off an extremely heavy pressure. Greetings, exalted celestial. The exalted celestial peak was in an uproar. On the steps, countless figures bowed in respect. The expert who stepped out of the palace was the ancestor of the Big Dipper Mountain, exalted celestial North Star. Chapter 2044. The Big Dipper clan, Big Dipper E, and many factions of the God realm hurried to the Big Dipper Mountain to celebrate. Countless heavenly wheel experts were present. The West Capital, South Court, and Eastern Immortal Sky were all present. Now, the Seamless Academy, the supreme holy land of the Sword World, also had a leading doyen, Sword God Severing Love. At this moment, the 1,000 steps of Celestial Worthy Peak were filled with a hubbub of voices. Countless cultivators from the realm of the gods looked at the emotionless Sword God and North Star exalted celestial at the entrance of Celestial Worthy Hall, their gazes filled with deep respect and envy. Today, the entire Big Dipper Mountain was a grand scene. It showed the importance of the major factions in the god realm. No other sect or family could compare to such a scene. Sword God Severing Love personally came. It's the Big Dipper Mountain's honor. If I can receive such treatment, I can die without regret. Hey, wake up. Stop dreaming. Crane Lord, the one standing behind Deacon Shui and accompanying Sword God Severing Love should be your son, right? On the viewing platform below the training ground, someone with keen eyes noticed that the youth behind Deacon Shui's face contained some of Hisun's charm. It is my son, he can. He has entered the academy and become Deacon Chui's sword-bearing attendant. He soon smiled happily, looking very proud. Congratulations, Crane Lord. Congratulations! Many people cupped their hands and congratulated him. The academy was the absolute core of the seamless realm. Only a few people were qualified to enter, and all of them were geniuses. Ha ha ha, you think too highly of him. My son is just a sword-bearing attendant. He Sun said. He Sun, no need to be humble. Even a sword-bearing attendant of the academy is enough to make us envious. A heavenly wheel expert laughed. After entering the academy, one would be able to cultivate in the academy and have many opportunities to approach the top experts, such as Sword God Severing Love and the other doyens. With a little guidance, one would definitely benefit immensely. More importantly, the academy was the foundation of the Divine Master's orthodoxy. Those who entered naturally had extraordinary statuses. Hisun was grinning from ear to ear as he chatted with the other Heavenly Wheel experts. Sending Hiken into the academy and following Deacon Chui was the proudest thing in his life. In fact, Hisun had also seen Qin Hao and Wuk in the West Capitals team. Zien had crossed the border from Tianyong to ask for his help. He wanted to send Wuk into the academy to cultivate, so Hisun naturally had some impression of him. When Hisun first arrived at Big Dipper Mountain, he was quite conflicted. After all, Qin Hao and Wuk's positions were actually higher than his. Not only were they not defeated by the West Capital's Little Conqueror, they even climbed up to Daisakong's family's influence. This made Hisun somewhat unhappy. However, now that his son was also standing in front of the celestial worthy temple and looking down at the experts below, the unhappiness in his heart instantly dissipated. He felt much more comfortable. So what if Zien was lucky enough to climb up to Daisakong? His son had already become a member of the academy. Hikan was in the 8th level of the law and was also about to prove divinity. Moreover, he would do so in the academy. His conditions were definitely 10 times or 100 times better than Wuk of the Kunlun Sea. Severing Love, I'm especially happy that you can represent the academy and come here. The Divine Master didn't forget our Big Dipper clan. Quickly follow me to the banquet. Big Dipper Skylord and Severing Love chatted for a while. He personally held each other's hands and sat on the main seat in the training hall. They were like two gods being worshipped by the world. Everyone, please return to your seats. Big Dipper Jichong said with a smile. The ceremony was about to begin. Zhang San, Qing Rong, and the leader of the South Yard, the elder Qing Huai, returned to their seats. At this moment, groups of disciples from the Big Dipper Mountain strode in from both sides of the training ground in an extremely orderly manner. They held bejeweled nectar and delicacies, and they placed them on every single banquet table. From the top of the stairs to the bottom, not a single viewing platform was left out. However, they only placed them halfway. Halfway down the celestial worthy peak, there was no more wine or delicacies. This was because the people below were not qualified to enjoy them at the same time as the experts above. Even so, the others were respectful and did not show any dissatisfaction. My grandson, Big Dipper E, has cultivated for 400 years and entered the divine path. He has inherited the divine legacy of the Big Dipper clan. Today, I invite all the friends of the divine realm to witness. From now on, when Big Dipper E goes out, he will represent the Big Dipper clan and the entire Big Dipper Mountain. Big Dipper Skylord said loudly. His voice rolled down. His calm tone contained an invisible majesty. Congratulations, Skylord. Congratulations, Izun. Everyone on the divine peak said in unison. Big Dipper Skylord nodded and faced Big Dipper E. From now on, your words and actions represent the face of the Big Dipper clan. Tianluan should have the aura of Tianluan and not be as frivolous as before. I will bear that in mind. Big Dipper Yi's expression was solemn. In the past, He could be unrestrained in the divine realm and do some ridiculous things. However, from now on, he could not be unrestrained. He had to be strict with himself and pay attention to the dignity of his clan. Big Dipper Skylord coveted Big Dipper In the future, his grandson would be a Tianluan powerhouse with responsibility and responsibility. He raised his cup and said, "Friends, please." After that, Big Dipper Skylord drank first. "Skylord, please." Everyone drank together. Senior Skylord, Izun has already proven his divinity. Today, Elder Severing Love came here on behalf of the Academy. Why not let Izun become Senior Severing Love's disciple and enter the Academy? Someone in the training hall said. Although Big Dipper Yi's background was extraordinary and could be said to be at the peak of the divine realm, and he had Big Dipper Skylord teaching him the divine path, compared to the Academy, the latter was superior. After all, the Divine Master would occasionally visit the Academy. If Big Dipper was lucky enough, there was a high chance that he could get close to the Divine Master. Although Old Man has the same idea, the Academy is not a place where anyone can enter. I wonder if old friend Severing Love will take a liking to my grandson. The Skylord laughed loudly. The Big Dipper clan's mountain-moving divine ability is the best in the sword world. Why would your grandson need Elder Severing Love's teachings? Wouldn't that be a waste of his time? Sword God Severing Love smiled. Big Dipper immediately felt disappointed. Elder Severing Love's meaning was obvious. He would not accept a disciple. Many people in the training hall revealed a regretful expression. In the seamless sword world, other than the Divine Master, Elder Sword Gods like Elder Severing Love were all powerful in the Sword Tao. Anyone who could become a disciple of one of them was extremely lucky. However, the Academy was not a place where anyone could enter. One had to go through a strict selection process. Only 1 or 2 lucky people would be favored by the Academy every few hundred years or even 1,000 years. This depended on the Academy's attitude. There was no fixed time for the selection process, and it depended on the situation. This was why the quota was so precious. Many big clans in the Divine Realm hoped to send their geniuses to the Academy, including the Big Dipper Mountain, the South Academy, and the Eastern Immortal Sky. Elder Severing Love, I heard that the Academy will be holding a sword conference soon. There will be no restrictions, and all planes in the seamless divine realm can participate. Is that true? The sect master of the Hidden Pill sect asked. This matter. Elder Severing Love seemed to be worried. He paused and nodded. It is true. There is no need to hide it from you. Seamless told us that in 3 months, the Academy will be holding a sword conference to add some new blood to increase the Academy's strength. The Seamless that Severing Love mentioned was the Seamless Divine Master. As soon as he said this, the entire peak was in an uproar. So the rumor was true. In fact, many clan leaders and sect masters knew that the Seamless Sword World, as one of the great Tao Sword Worlds, had the weakest foundation. It was indeed inferior to Rikujinji and True Dragon Sword World. Regardless of the cultivation of the Divine Masters or the situation of the cultivators in the world, it was inferior to the other 2 worlds. Especially in recent years, as the monstrous geniuses of Rikujinji and True Dragon Sword World broke through to the Divinity Realm one after another, the gap between the Seamless Realm and them grew bigger and bigger. For example, Lu Qiu, the son of Divine Master Lu, and Long Mia, the 6th son of Divine Master Long, had forged the Celestial Wheel and perfectly inherited the bloodline of the 2 Divine Masters. On the other hand, there were very few people in the Seamless Divine Realm who could compare to Lu Qiu and Long Mia. Even if there were, it was because they were strong and had cultivated for a long time. If they were compared to their peers, there was almost no one in the Seamless Realm who could match Lu Qiu and Long Mia. After the uproar, the celestial worthy peak fell into a short silence. The clan leaders and sect masters, including the Northern Dipper Skylord, fell into deep thought. They all had their own ideas. Although the princes of Divine Master Lu and Divine Master Long are strong, our seamless divine realm isn't weak either. After all, the celestial wheel doesn't represent the overall strength. Someone said, "Now that Yi Zun has become a god, he should be the pillar of our divine realm and fight for a place to enter the academy. In front of the monstrous geniuses of Rikugenji and True Dragon Sword World, we should show the power of our seamless divine realm." That's right. Yi Zun will definitely be able to pass the academy's examination and become a disciple that the academy will focus on training. Here, let us congratulate you in advance. Everyone toasted. Ha ha, my friends, you're too kind. My grandson is not the pillar of the divine realm. This kind of qualification should be given to the new disciple of the South Academy's dean. The Northern Dipper Skylord took a sip of wine, put down the wine bottle and glanced at Nangong Miao. Among the rising stars of the divine realm, Nangong Miao's reputation was extremely high and he was also very confident. In all honesty, the Northern Dipper Skylord felt that Yi Zun was still a bit lacking when compared to Lu Qiu and Long Mia. The little disciple of the South Academy's dean can indeed take on a great responsibility. The immortal Divine Master said, "I believe that Nangong Miao is already confident of entering the academy, right?" The soaring cloud Divine Master smiled. "My junior brother's cultivation is still shallow. He can't be compared to the geniuses of Rikugenji and Long Mia." The leader of the South Academy smiled and complimented. Prince Lu Qiu and Prince Long Mia can be considered the top of the current generation of the Great Path Sword World. However, as the senior just said, the grade of the Heavenly Wheel doesn't necessarily represent the overall strength. If I'm lucky enough to enter the academy and receive the guidance of the seniors, I might be able to fight," Nangong Miao said proudly. After hearing this, everyone was shocked. Nangong Miao was indeed arrogant and talked big. "You!" Si Huan pointed at Nangong Miao. In the next moment, he suddenly laughed and held his stomach. "Forget it. Don't stand in front of them with your legs shaking and peeing your pants. It's embarrassing." How dare Nangong Miao compare himself to Lu Qiu and Long Mia? Although Si Huan had never seen Lu Qiu and Long Mia, from the information he received from the Sikong residents, these two were extremely monstrous. They were completely qualified to replace the divine masters of their father generation. What Nangong Miao had forged was a saint-grade heaven's wheel, a mere great heaven's wheel. He had acknowledged a South Courtyard dean with a profound cultivation as his master. In the divine realm, it was alright to bluff people, but if it were to really compete with Lu Qiu, it might not even be able to withstand a single move. This was not because Si Huan looked down on the other party. After all, the news from the Sikong residents was very convincing. If there was anyone in the infinite divine realm who could withstand the pressure of Lu Qiu and Long Mia, it definitely wouldn't be Nangong Miao and Big Dipper E. It would only be the core disciples of the academy. However, those people had been in the divine realm for too long and had been cultivating in the academy. They couldn't lower their status and bully people who were weaker than them. Thinking of this, Si Huan glanced at Qin Hao beside him with a hint of surprise in his eyes. Until now, he still hadn't figured out the grade of Qin Hao's heavenly wheel. However, from the day he received a palm strike from Fairy Qing Rong, it was somewhat unfathomable. Perhaps Qin Hao could try to enter the academy. If he was selected and received the guidance of the elders of the Sword World, he might be able to fight with Lu Qiu. In addition, there was also the yellow-clothed fairy from the eastern immortal heaven. Si Huan shrunk his head and secretly glanced at her. The yellow-clothed fairy was called Loi. She was also an extremely ruthless character. She had an immortal grade heavenly wheel. Perhaps no one in the divine realm knew about this. Chapter 2045. The grade of the heavenly wheel was extremely important in the divine path. Even if one's attainment was not mentioned, its advantages and disadvantages greatly limited the heavenly wheel's potential. Especially when both sides had the same attainment, the effect was the most obvious. For example, Nangong Miao, who was also of the reincarnation lineage. How could a saint-grade heavenly wheel defeat Lu Qiu's immortal-grade heavenly wheel? Unless one used attainment to suppress the other, the chance of winning was almost zero. Although Si Huan's private life was terrible, he had a thorough understanding of the divine path. The immortal-grade heavenly wheel contained much more divine power than a saint-grade heavenly wheel. As for the power of divine techniques, how could Lu Qiu and Long Miao's divine powers be weaker than those of the South Yard? Nangong Miao thought too highly of himself. At this moment, the people of the South Yard saw Si Huan laughing and mocking Nangong Miao, and they all showed traces of anger. "Ha, young Master Si is right. I, Nangong Miao, may not be as good as Lu Qiu and Prince Long Miao, but I'm curious about young Master Si. You stopped at the Emperor's path and have no time to improve. How can you have the nerve to say the word shame when you see people of the same generation consecutively proving themselves?" Nangong Miao looked at Si Huan with a smile. The grandson of West Capital's Daisakong, a trusted follower of the Divine Master, who was more ashamed of the word shame? "You!" Si Huan slammed his palm on the table and stood up. "My junior brother is just stating facts. As a descendant of the Sikong family, don't you care about your own cultivation first? Or, young Master Si, do you think you can lead the infinite realm to a new height?" Elder Qing Huai of the South Yard said coldly. "Ha!" The people of the South Yard laughed one after another. The West Capital's little overlord becoming the pillar of the divine realm was probably the funniest thing today. In terms of mastery of sensual pleasures, no one present could beat Si Huan. Asking him to become the pillar of swordsmanship? Sorry, he wasn't worthy. Creak. Si Huan clenched his fists, and blue veins appeared on his neck. He seemed to have reached his limit. Zhang Xian's expression was ugly as he glared at Qing Huai. Qing Huai shrugged at Zhang Xian, indicating that he had misspoken and was sorry. All the forces in the domain of the gods knew that it was true that Si Huan's domineering behavior was a headache, but his cultivation was indeed the only sore spot of the Sikong residents. His peers had stepped into the divine path one after another, but Si Huan had been unable to break through to the emperor level. As the grandson of Daisakong and the disciple of the Divine Master, he had truly embarrassed the domain of the gods. On the side, Big Dipper E was secretly smiling. That's enough. The West Capital and the South Yard are both top-notch orthodoxies. They maintain order in the divine realm on behalf of the Divine Master. Northern Dipper Empyrean said in a dignified voice. He wasn't afraid that the people here would laugh at him. Severing Love silently glanced at Si Huan, shook his head, and sighed. A trace of sympathy welled up in his heart. Si Huan's inability to break through to the emperor level was due to a special reason. It was not because of his poor talent or his laziness. Not only that, but Severing Love also knew that Si Huan was secretly working hard on his cultivation. Unfortunately, no matter how hard he worked, he could not reverse his destiny. Because his fate was flawed, he was destined to be unable to achieve great things in his life. Therefore, he pretended to be arrogant and domineering to deceive the eyes of the world. He thought that by doing so, he could make the orthodoxies of the domain of the gods fear him. Arrogance was just Si Huan's protective clothing. Let's drink. Severing Love's heart was slightly heavy as he raised his wine glass to the crowd. The Celestial Lord sighed silently and drank with Severing Love. He was also aware of Si Huan's situation. After all, Si Huan almost died back then. It was Daisakong who begged the Divine Master to use the power of the world to save Si Huan's life. The little overlord of the West Capital was essentially a pitiful child. Some people improve quickly and have remarkable achievements, so they like to show off. On the other hand, Those who are unknown are easy to ignore. Brother Nangong, how can you be so sure that young Master C will not enter the divine realm? In my opinion, when young Master C enters the divine realm one day, he may be stronger than you. Not only young Master C, but all the brothers in the Sikong residence are silent and hardworking, unlike some people who like to show off their achievements. At this time, a voice came from the side. Si Huan's heartstrings trembled. He lowered his head and said, "Third year." Bang! The wine glass in Nangong Miao's hand fell heavily. His gaze fell on the silver-haired youth. "What do you mean by that? The person who likes to show off is me, Nangong Miao? If you say so, then so be it. In any case, you are always right." Wuk drank the wine in his hand. He didn't like people like Si Huan, but during the days they lived in the Sikong residence, Daisakong didn't treat them unfairly. Apart from the uncomfortable feeling of being suppressed in the dungeon at first, he later opened the Heavenly Book Pavilion to Zien and the others and provided many divine crystals to help them cultivate. For this reason, Wuk couldn't let outsiders slander Daisakong's grandson. Moreover, Wuk didn't like Nangong Miao. "How dare you?" Cheng Huai shouted as he stood up straight. Nangong Miao was his junior brother, and the South Campus had high hopes for him. His master saw Nangong Miao as a rising banner of the South Campus. His status was like 7-star righteousness, the grandson of the celestial venerate. Nangong Miao's words were undoubtedly the attitude of the South Campus. Wuk's words were mocking the South Campus. Nangong Miao is right. Si Huan can never step into the divine path in this lifetime, 7-star righteousness said. Outsiders didn't know about Si Huan's situation, but the core members of the Four Titans knew a little. Si Huan's innate fate was flawed. "Shut up," the Celestial Venerate said. The Celestial asked, "How could such a thing be made public? It would damage the Western capital. Grandfather, Si Huan's fate spirit is damaged, and he is trapped in the Emperor's path, unable to ascend to the divine path. This matter will be known by others sooner or later. If I don't say it now, won't the forces of the divine realm find it strange in 100 or 1,000 years?" Big Dipper looked at Qin Hao and said, "As for what you said, there's a hierarchy in the path of cultivation, and the strength cannot be determined immediately. This is true in the cultivation world. However, Si Huan does not have that opportunity." As soon as 7-star righteousness's voice fell, a palm wind immediately slapped him in the face, throwing him from the banquet to the center of the training field. 7-star righteousness angrily shouted, "Get out!" When Daisakong was still a page boy, he had always followed Sword God of Ichi and served the Divine Lord. He had experienced countless life and death tribulations, and the relationship between master and servant had surpassed familial love. Now, the Divine Lord had allowed Daisakong to leave him and establish a generation of fame, becoming the ruler of the West capital. His grandson's disability was enough to make people sympathize with him. How could 7-star righteousness open his scars in front of everyone today? If 7-star righteousness was born with a disability, how would the Divine Lord feel? This slap was especially loud, and it spread all the way down the 1,000 steps of the Celestial Mountain. All the heavenly wheel powerhouses on the viewing platform heard it clearly, and they couldn't help but be shocked. Today, 7-star righteousness was actually slapped to the ground by the Divine Lord. What was even more shocking was that Daisakong's grandson's cultivation had stagnated. It turned out that he was suffering from a fatal illness. At this moment, on the densely packed Dao Peak, the powerhouses of the Divine Realm and hundreds of thousands of cultivators were all shocked. "Divine Lord, I have other matters to attend to, so I won't disturb you any longer." Sword God Severing Love's expression was cold as he stood up from his seat. "Severing Love, I didn't discipline him well." The Divine Lord lowered his head. He was afraid that after today, everyone in the Divine Realm would know that Si Huan was a person with a fatal illness. How embarrassed would Daisakong be? Forget it. Just as 7-star righteousness said, you'll know sooner or later. Severing Love left his seat and came to see Juan. See Juan, Grandpa Severing Love hasn't been to the Sikong residence in a long time. Take me back and have a seat. Okay. Si Juan tried hard not to let the tears fall from his eyes. Stubbornness was written all over his face. Before he left, he turned around and shouted at 7-star righteousness, 7-star righteousness, from today onwards I, Si Juan, and your family friendship ends here. From now on, the West Capital does not welcome any disciples of the Big Dipper Mountain. Violators will bear the consequences. Humph. Zhang Xian snorted angrily. Return to the West Capital. Wait. Qin Hao stood up, startling Si Juan and Zhang Xian. Following that, Qin Hao strode towards the Southern Court's seating area. He came before Nangong Miao and glanced at Cheng Huai. He smiled politely and said, I'm not talented, but I have a brother who is at the 8th level of the laws and is about to attain godhood. I heard that the Southern Court's Dermic Tao is profound and the heavenly cycle sword arts are infinitely mysterious. I've specially come to seek guidance from the Southern Court's disciples. Many sect masters and divine realm experts in the dojo revealed strange expressions. Guidance? He was challenging the Southern Court. The silver-haired youth appeared humble and polite on the surface, but he was actually standing up for Si Juan. However, the Southern Court was a hegemon faction that dominated the divine realm. The disciples in the Southern Court were all very talented. Although they were inferior to the academy, they were definitely outstanding in the divine realm. Ordinary people were no match for them. Even the descendants of large clans and many godly venerables' direct disciples might not be able to win against the Southern Court's disciples. Guidance? Nangong Miao narrowed his eyes. 8th level of the laws? Wuk, Qin Hao said. Wuk stepped forward with a tall and straight posture. His pair of starry eyes flashed with sword light, and his 2 sword-like eyebrows made people feel that he had an extraordinary temperament. Almost at the same time, Sword God Severing Love and North Star Heavenly Lord's gazes fell on Wuk with a hint of interest in their eyes. 3rd level. Si Juan wanted to say something but stopped. The Southern Court's disciples were not ordinary people. They had gathered many peerless geniuses in the infinite divine realm. Qin Hao directly interrupted, My brother Wuk likes to deal with monsters. Or do the Southern Court's disciples think they're not monsters enough? These words were like a slap to the face, making it difficult for the Southern Court's disciples to back down. If they didn't fight, would they admit that they were mediocre? Humph, arrogant. Immediately, a figure stood out from behind Nangong Miao and stood directly in front of Wuk. It was a middle-aged man who was even taller than Wuk. He said coldly, Do you think you're strong? Wuk raised his head and rubbed the tip of his nose like Qin Hao. He glanced at Nangong Miao and said, SOSO. If the laws are perfected and the heavenly wheel is cast, I shouldn't be inferior to Brother Nangong. I even think I'm a little stronger. Do you want to try? Senior Brother Qi, he's not taking you seriously. Show him what you're made of. The Southern Court's disciples shouted loudly. They were extremely dissatisfied with Wuk's attitude. In the Southern Court, everyone knew that Qi's strength was second only to Nangong Miao. If the other party said that he was not inferior to Nangong Miao, wouldn't that be a direct slap to Qi's face? Of course, Wuk didn't know the middle-aged man's position in the Southern Court at all. He thought that he was just a random person who wanted to correct the Southern Court's name. Haha, sure. Nangong Qi, please enlighten me. Qi sneered and nodded repeatedly. He walked around Wuk and stood in the center of the training hall, waiting for the other party to make a move. In the 3rd year of junior high school, Qi is in the 8th level of the laws. He's about to perfect divinity. He's very strong. His reputation in the Southern Court is second only to Nangong Miao. Many people say that the heavenly wheel he casts in the future will definitely not be below the saint level. While Si Huan was moved, he was also worried for Wuk. He didn't know the situation of the people in Kunlun Sea, but he knew the strength of the Southern Court's disciples very well. Qi wasn't easy to deal with. It's okay. Qin Hao smiled and said to Wuk, the Southern Court's disciples are very talented. You must be very serious when you attack. I will be very, very serious. Wuk nodded and walked toward Qi. He naturally understood what Qin Hao meant by serious. Chapter 2046. Wulin Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Complete defeat. In the celestial Worthy Peak Training Hall, 7 wings of the South Yard stood there, waiting for Wuk to make his move. This battle had attracted the attention of everyone on the peak. At the top of the 1,000-step staircase, there were countless viewing platforms, and at the foot of the mountain, cultivators were all looking up. Today was supposed to be the Big Dipper Ascension ceremony, and all the forces in the divine realm had come to observe the ceremony. Make your move, 7 Wings said with a sullen face. Next, he would teach this ignorant swordsman on behalf of the South Yard. Wu Kei faced the Southern Courtyard disciple, Qi Yi. Sword splendor flowed around his body, and he suddenly shot forward like an extremely fast light. He closed his 2 fingers together, and his sword fingers emitted an incomparably dazzling sharpness as he pointed forward. This was not the golden finger. Although Qin Hao and Wuk often exchanged sword techniques in private and taught each other sword skills, the golden finger required a solid foundation from the moment one stepped into the martial way. He had missed the training of the finger technique and could not fully exert its power. Now Wuk's finger was a set of sword fingers that evolved from the golden finger and his sword will. Perhaps it was not as powerful as Qin Hao's golden finger, but it included his own nature sword principle and was no small matter. Seeing this, Qi Yi sneered and stepped forward. His movement technique was extremely fast, like a gust of wind. He also pointed at Wu Kei, and a glaring sword light condensed on his finger. Showing off your sword fingers in front of senior brother 7 Wings is stupid. A disciple of the South Yard laughed sarcastically. Everyone in the South Yard knew that 7 Wings was the most accomplished in the sword fingers. He was the disciple of the elder finger of the inner yard. Fighting head-on with 7 Wings was asking for trouble. Bang! A muffled sound rang out from the training hall. The smile of the Southern Courtyard disciple who had just spoken immediately froze on his face. As Flawless and 7 Wings came into contact, 2 flashing sword fingers collided. A figure was suddenly sent flying. It was 7 Wings. How could it be? In an instant, all the disciples and elders of the South Yard stood up from their seats, and their expressions were full of shock. In one move, 7 Wings was at a disadvantage. As Qi Yi flew backward, he felt a sharp pain in his finger. He felt as if his finger bones had been pierced by a sword will. The sword will of the cold-faced youth he had fought with was rare and contained an indestructible power. He had lost to the sword will, not the finger technique. 7 Winged was truly worthy of being a disciple of one of the top forces of the divine realm. His reaction was extremely fast. As he flew backwards, he cleverly spun around, using his body to offset the impact of Wuk. Then, he flung out his sleeves, sending out a brilliant light that shot towards Wuk. After Wu Kei sent the 7 Wings flying, he stood at the center of the Dao field as steady as a mountain. He looked at the row of sword chi flying towards him, flickering with intense law particles. His hands moved, forming a sword seal. With a buzzing sound, boundless sword intent gushed out from Wu Kei's body, sweeping towards the Dao field. Everywhere it touched, it transformed into a sword domain. When the sword chi swept out by 7 Wings entered Wu Kei's domain of sword wei, its flying speed suddenly came to a halt. It was stuck in mid-air and trembled repeatedly. As strands of golden sword wool wrapped around it, the sword chi was dyed gold and turned into golden divine swords. In the next moment, the strange scene caused many experts on the viewing platform below the stairs to cry out in surprise. Swish! 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 Not only did Seven Wings' sword chi not stab towards Wuk, but it also changed direction in the blink of an eye and rushed back towards Seven Wings. What? When Cheng Huai saw this, he stood up from his seat like the other disciples of the southern courtyard. To the side, Nangong Miao's face was less frivolous and more solemn. He stared at Wuk with a serious gaze and deeply felt that this person was not simple. It seemed that his sword Tao was exceptionally powerful. In this battle, Seven Wings might have encountered a rare expert. Interesting. A strange light flashed in the eyes of the emotionless Severing Sword Elder, as if he had seen an extremely rare and interesting thing. He was very clear in his heart that the reason the sword chi had killed Seven Wings was because it had been tainted by the flawless sword intent. If Wuk had stepped into the divine way, cast the heavenly wheel, and was a level higher than Seven Wings, it would be normal for him to use sword will to reverse Seven Wings' sword chi. But in the case of the same cultivation level, it was almost impossible for one side to reverse the sword chi of the other. What did this prove? Wuk's knowledge, understanding, and application of sword Tao, including the strength of his condensed sword will, were far superior to Seven Wings. In fact, from this moment on, Severing Love could conclude that the strength of the two sides was not on the same level. In this battle, the disciples of the southern courtyard would probably be slaughtered by the sword cultivator of the western capital. This boy is extraordinary. Why haven't I heard of him before? Northstar Skylord was thoughtful. He was relatively familiar with the talents of the Sikong residents in the western capital, but today was the first time he had seen a junior with such a strong sword will like Wuk. It felt as if he had jumped out of thin air. Was it because he had not paid attention to the divine realm for too long that he had overlooked something? Seven Wings, do your best. This person's strength is beyond your imagination. Nangong Miao shouted, his voice rolling out. Even though he had stepped into the divine way and cast the heavenly wheel, he still felt a trace of danger from Wuk's sword will. No wonder the western capital had sent this person to the southern courtyard to ask for advice. They had clearly come prepared. Seven Wings had lost a great deal in this battle. Nangong Miao could only ask him to do his best to avoid losing too badly. Open. Seven Wings did not doubt Nangong Miao's judgment at all. After all, he was the only genius of the southern courtyard who had suppressed him. He roared, and a silver brilliance erupted from the training hall. It was incomparably gorgeous. Then, huge wings spread out from Seven Wings' back. He was like a divine bird soaring in the sky. He took a step and soared into the sky, trying to avoid the golden divine sword. Wuk looked up at the sky and flicked his finger. The golden divine sword turned into a row of light and flew up from the training hall. Quickly caught up with Seven Wings. What a flexible sword will! It's fast and accurate. Who is this person? In the seats of the training hall, countless sect leaders and divine Lord Tianluan looked at Wuk. It was rare to see a junior with such terrifying control. At this moment, Wuk seemed to be confirming what Qin Hao had said before. Most of the time, people only saw a show-off clown. On the contrary, people who were unknown were the easiest to ignore and not pay attention to. However, one could amaze the world with a single brilliant feat at this moment, whether it was Sword God Severing Love, Northern Dipper Skylord, or the countless sect leaders and divine lords in the training hall. They were all shocked by Wuk's strength, making him the center of attention. Looking at the expressions of the many old seniors in the divine realm, Qin Hao's reaction was very calm. It was as if this was how it should be. He's not serious enough, Qin Hao whispered in his heart. Although Seven Wings was almost unable to withstand Wuk's attacks without using his best sword skills, Qin Hao believed that Wuk was not serious enough. Ding! Ding! A series of attacks rang out in the sky. Seven Wing was unable to dodge in time and had no choice but to use his huge wings to wrap around his body, forcibly enduring the golden divine swords. Following the continuous attacks, every collision seemed to shake his heart. His wings were suffused with intense pain, as if they were about to be pierced through and into his heart. Although these sword chi were released by Seven Wings, after being infected by Wuk's sword will, they were stronger than Seven Wings' sword Dao. So miserable! A fairy from the eastern divinity heaven looked at the figure in the sky. Countless sword chi exploded on Seven Wings' body. With every sound, there would be a broken feather floating down. Seven Wings' body was also constantly sinking. The funny thing was that these sword chi were originally released by the disciples of the South Yard, but now they could not withstand it. Phew! Qin Hao stretched out his hand and yawned. He said, "I'm a little tired." When his voice fell into Wuk's ears, Wuk knew that this guy was dissatisfied. Suddenly, a glaring golden stream danced under Wuk's feet. It surged into the sky like a tornado. As far as the eye could see, countless golden sword streams were hidden in the tornado, interweaving into a twisting sword river. "Go down." A voice came out of the gap. Suddenly, the faces of the disciples of the Southern Yard in the training hall changed drastically. The ascending tornado swooped down like a mad dragon, aiming to devour the Seventh Wing. Strands of golden light fell like shooting stars, constantly piercing the Seventh Wing's wings that were wrapped around his body. With feathers flying everywhere and a rain of blood falling, there was finally a scream in the sky. Seven Wings! Qing Huai clenched his fist. He saw that Seven Wings was still holding on, resisting the sword streams in the sky, unwilling to fall down. It was as if he was going to do everything he could to maintain his last bit of dignity. When Wuk saw this, he pointed his sword at the sky. The Emperor's will rose up and merged with the momentum of heaven and earth. Without entering the divine path, he could not resonate with the heavenly path. Moreover, this was the infinite divine realm, not the divine wilderness continent. However, this did not prevent him from borrowing the power of heaven and earth. After all, he was a sword cultivator purer than all living beings in the infinite divine realm. Buzz! Wisps of dark clouds shrouded the celestial worthy peak. Wuk had triggered the momentum of heaven and earth, causing a natural phenomenon. Everyone could clearly feel an astonishing power brewing in the space. This move is... Beside Fairy Clear Rong, Loi's delicate eyes flashed with a strange light. It was a very familiar feeling, just like that night. Seven Wings back down, Nangong Xiong shouted. His body immediately took a step forward. Just as his front foot moved, a domineering figure blocked his path. It was the commander of the West region, Zhang Ji. Borrowing sword from the heavens. Wuk's sword finger slashed down. A ray of light suddenly appeared in the surging dark clouds in the sky. The heavenly light opened, illuminating the celestial worthy peak. A majestic divine sword thousands of feet long pierced through the clouds, like a terrifying beam of light, and heavily slammed into Seven Wings. Amidst the tragic cries, the second disciple of the southern courtyard, Qi Yi, was ruthlessly pressed to the ground by this sword light from the sky. The celestial worthy peak also trembled slightly, and countless stone slabs flew wildly in front of everyone's eyes. The sweeping sword intent caused these heavenly wheel experts to feel a faint tingling sensation on their bodies. Rumble! The turbulent sound waves continued for a while. As the huge sword light slowly dissipated, a circular crater appeared in the center of the celestial worthy peak. The ground had a radius of 10 meters, and the ground had sunk by 3 feet. A ragged figure lay inside. Seven Wings was ragged and covered in blood. Just by looking at his figure, who would have thought that he was a genius disciple of the South Campus, one of the giant forces of the divine realm? However, Seven Wings had already fainted on the spot, which saved him from being pointed at. At this time, the leader of the South Campus, Qing Huai, strode forward and came to Seven Wings' side. He squatted down to check his injuries. Many heavenly wheel powerhouses of the South Campus gathered together. "How are his injuries?" someone asked. Qing Huai heaved a sigh of relief. "He was only knocked unconscious. It's not a big deal. The sword cultivators of the West region didn't use too much force, but Seven Wings' situation was worse than being killed. This was because spiritual injuries were far more difficult to heal than physical injuries. They would be detrimental for life. I'm afraid Seven Wings won't be able to prove himself in today's small battle." A heavenly wheel powerhouse shook his head. Chapter 2047. Seven Wing was at the 8th level of the laws and was only a hair's breadth away from perfection. His talent and cultivation were extremely rare among his peers in the realm of the gods. He was impeccable and had high hopes for him. Nangong Miao and Seven Wing were also the only two geniuses of the South Campus who could enter the academy. Their chances of success were very high. But in this battle, Seven Wing had been defeated by Wuk. When they fought, he had been crushed from beginning to end and had no strength to turn the situation around. It could be called a bloody slaughter. One could imagine how big of a blow this battle would be to Seven Wing. Losing was not scary, especially losing to a senior whose realm and cultivation were higher than his. On the other hand, Wuk was at the same realm as Seven Wing. Such a crushing defeat would definitely shake Seven Wing's Tao heart and leave an indelible shadow that would follow him for the rest of his life. At this time, many heavenly wheel experts of the South Campus sighed and shook their heads. They had hoped that Seven Wing could enter the divine path and forge the heavenly wheel before the Academy Martial Arts Symposium began. They wanted to go hand in hand with Nangong Miao, shoulder the glory of the South Campus, and step into the supreme holy land of the infinite divine world. But after today there was no more hope. Supreme God Dan'in, Immortal Supreme God, Secluded Spring Sect Master, Supreme God Soaring Cloud, Immortal Xuani, and many other seniors of the realm of the gods were also dumbfounded. In fact, they had not expected that a disciple of the South Campus would lose, and lose so miserably. When their eyes fell on Wuk, many of them were puzzled. This sword cultivator of the West Capital looked unfamiliar, and no one even knew his name, but his strength in the way of the sword was so terrifying. Imperceptibly, Qin Hao's words were like a deafening bell, deeply stimulating everyone. It turned out that talents with real strength did not care to show off. In contrast, the style of the South Campus before was like a claptrap clown. Although Qin Hao did not say it directly, it gave people the feeling. "Let's go." Qin Hao patted Si Huan's shoulder. Si Huan seemed to wake up from a dream. He looked at Qin Hao in disbelief and then at Wuk. Wuk withdrew his sword will and stood there like an ordinary person, but his face was a little old-fashioned, as if he did not know how to smile. But just now, this taciturn guy completely defeated a core disciple of the South Campus, Seven Wing. "How dare you belittle my brother? Let's go." Qin Hao hooked his arm around Si Huan's shoulder, just like the day they became sworn brothers. But this time, Qin Hao hooked his arm around Si Huan's shoulder and walked forward. They looked quite harmonious and didn't look out of place. "Big brother, from now on, you're my real big brother." Si Huan was protected by Qin Hao's arm. He suddenly realized how strong this arm was. It was steady and powerful. With this arm protecting him, who in the divine realm would dare to mock him for having a poor fate? Moreover, so what if his life was in danger? Even if he could never ascend to the God Ascension stage, it was enough that his brother was strong. Thinking of this, Si Huan's mind suddenly brightened. The depression brought by the South Campus and the Big Dipper righteousness was swept away. He raised his head again, and his face glowed with pride. He felt that his future was bright. Wait! Nangong Miao walked over quickly and stretched out an arm to stop Qin Hao. Qin Hao said, "What's the matter?" Wuk had defeated Seven Wing and crushed him all the way, which could be considered as helping Si Huan vent his anger. Both sides knew what each other was thinking, so there was nothing to say. Now that Nangong Miao suddenly stopped Qin Hao, could it be that he wanted to make a comeback? "I don't think I've seen you before," Nangong Miao said. "Is it important?" Qin Hao asked. Nangong Miao smiled. "It's not very important. The West Capital's Sikong residence is recruiting talent. Naturally, I don't have to interfere. But you won one round. You don't have to leave immediately. What are you afraid of?" "What am I afraid of?" Qin Hao asked with a smile. "Since you're not afraid, why don't we have another round? I see that you're also a Heavenly Wheel Realm cultivator. Why don't we exchange some pointers?" Nangong Miao's eyes flashed with fighting spirit. Wuk frowned. Looking for Qin Hao to exchange pointers? Heavenly Wheel Rune? Looking for a beating? Eastern Shintian Loi also frowned slightly. Nangong Miao didn't want to let go. He wanted to regain face for the southern courtyard, but this time, he picked the wrong person. "I'm an alchemist. Although I'm also a Heavenly Wheel Realm cultivator, I'm not good at fighting. Sorry, I refuse." Qin Hao smiled and waved his hand to push Nangong Miao away. He left with Zhang Xian and the others. Supreme God Dan Yin and Immortal Supreme God were speechless. However, since he was a Heavenly Wheel Realm cultivator, and his swordsmanship was not as good as Nangong Miao's, it was reasonable to refuse. Pretentious. Loi looked at Qin Hao's back and muttered. He was obviously strong, but he said he was not good at fighting. It wasn't that he wasn't good at fighting, but he probably didn't think highly of Nangong Miao. Luo Yi thought about it, Nangong Miao was indeed not worthy. If it was her who challenged her to a battle, she would not accept it either. She would not feel any sense of accomplishment even if she won by teaching a narcissistic Holy Sky Wheel idiot a lesson. Timid as a mouse. Afraid of our senior brother Nangong Miao. Don't leave if you have the ability. The disciples of the southern courtyard seemed to have recovered from the defeat of Seven Wings. Seeing that Nangong Miao scared away Qin Hao with one sentence, they were all full of fighting spirit. If they had let senior brother Miao teach the people of the western capital a lesson, the reputation of the southern courtyard wouldn't have been ruined. "I hope we can meet again when the martial arts symposium begins," Nangong Miao shouted into the void. They could run for a day, but they couldn't run for a lifetime. As long as they were still in the infinite divine domain, they would meet sooner or later. "You better not have that hope." A sentence came from the void from afar. It was shouted by Wuk, who had defeated Seven Wings. After hearing this sentence, the disciples of the southern courtyard became even more dissatisfied. The 8th level Law Realm sword cultivator of the western capital seemed to be a little arrogant after defeating Seven Wings. He dared to speak to senior brother Nangong Miao like this. Although they were dissatisfied, the western capital team had already left. The disciples of the southern courtyard could only make a few noise. They definitely couldn't chase after them to the Sikong residence. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to withstand a slap from Daesekong. "Senior Celestial Venerable, we will also take our leave first." Fairy Clear Rong stood up and said. Sword God Severing Love had left with the Western Capital team. There was no point in them staying here. North Star Celestial Venerable nodded. "Celestial Venerable, Seven Wings is seriously injured and unconscious. We need to bring him back to the southern courtyard to recuperate. We will also go back," Cheng Hui said. "Go." North Star Celestial Venerable didn't urge them to stay. Then, the people of the southern courtyard took the unconscious Seven Wings and left Big Dipper Mountain. The western capital, the eastern sky Celestial Venerable, the southern courtyard, and the Academy's sword god Severing Love left one after another, causing the atmosphere of Big Dipper Mountain to become much quieter. However, many sect masters and divine venerables were there, so it didn't affect much. The banquet continued until dusk and sunset. Then, the various forces returned from celestial venerable peak to their orthodoxies. "Father, why are you so silent?" On the way back, he can of the Crane residence spoke to Crane Venerable. Severing Love had only brought a few divine path experts from the academy to the western capital to catch up with Daisakong. Some of the other disciples returned to the academy, while some returned home to visit their relatives. "Sai, Kenner, did I do something wrong?" He soon raised his head, his face full of melancholy. Previously, Ziyin had crossed the border from Tianyong with a group of people from the Kunlun Sea to ask for his help to send a junior into the academy. At that time, He Sun had rejected him on the spot. Because of this, He Sun had mercilessly drawn a line between himself and the Kunlun Sea. However, today on Big Dipper Mountain, the cold-faced sword cultivator who had crushed the core disciples of the southern courtyard was the junior Ziyin had brought that day. He Sun wasn't confused. Those who could step into the celestial wheel realm naturally had their own unique abilities. From this battle, he could clearly see that Wuk was extremely talented and was a rare sword cultivator in the world. If such a person wanted to enter the academy, he would have enough ability to fight for it without relying on connections. After all, Wuk had already defeated 7 wings. And in the divine realm, how many 7 wings of the southern courtyard were there? Very few. 7 wings' strength wasn't weak. When he fought with Wuk, he hadn't used many of his unique skills and strongest trump cards. It wasn't that he didn't want to use them, but that he was too late and was crushed by his opponent. Moreover, He Sun had a premonition that even if 7 wings used the heavenly cycle sword technique and sword wings of the southern courtyard, it wouldn't be of any help. After all, in that battle, Wuk was too dazzling and his aura was too strong. He didn't feel like a Nirvana sword emperor, but more like a sword deity. This was the understanding of Tao. Without forging the celestial wheel, his intent had reached the divine path. He lowered his head and didn't dare to respond. He knew that his father was blaming himself for missing out on a talent in the Tao of the sword. If he had agreed to Ziyin clan lord's request to send Wuk to the academy, the elders of the academy would have known that Wuk was a talent in the Tao of the sword and would have nurtured him. At that time, Wuk's background would have been labeled as Crane Residence. Being a disciple of Crane Lord, how glorious would he soon be? It was a pity that he had lost this opportunity. After returning to the Sikong residence, Sword Elder Severing Love went to the Sikong Hall to have a heart-to-heart talk with Daisakong. Daisakong personally came out of the hall to welcome him. He was very happy. When the academy was founded, they were old acquaintances and had endless things to talk about. Si Huan accompanied them in the hall. Qin Hao and Wuk returned to the Heavenly Book Pavilion. They briefly explained to Ziyin what had happened at the Big Dipper Mountain and immediately began to cultivate. At the banquet, Sword God Severing Love made it clear that the academy was about to hold a sword conference to integrate new blood into the academy to strengthen the younger generation. Although there were no restrictions in this sword conference, most people in the divine region knew that the academy would definitely choose from the Nirvana realm's 7th and 8th states and the celestial wheel 1 vein. If the realm was too low and far from the divine path, the academy wouldn't accept them. Similarly, if the cultivation was too high and the divine path had already been stabilized, the academy wouldn't accept them either. Since Sword God Severing Love had spoken on behalf of the Divine Master, it indicated that the Academy's Sword Conference would be held soon. Qin Hao himself had no intention of entering the Academy. He was the supreme god of the original realm and bore an extremely strong power of faith. He cultivated many kinds of supernatural powers, and the Sword Way was only one of them. However, Wuk definitely had to enter because Wuk only cultivated the sword. If he wanted to become an extraordinary sword god, He had to borrow the power of the Academy's seniors. It would be best if he could attract the attention of the Divine Master and use the power of the big world to help Wuk forge the celestial wheel. That way, the possibility of forging a perfect celestial wheel would be extremely high. It would be too difficult for Wuk to rely on himself. Since there was still some time, he had to improve his strength as much as possible so that he could shine at the Sword Conference. The Seamless Academy was one of the 3 core sword realms. One could imagine how many extraordinary people would rush to the Divine Region on that day. The scene would definitely surpass the grand ceremony of the Kunlun Sea. Wuk wanted to stand out among the thousands of swordsmen. In fact, Qin Hao didn't dare to say that he had absolute confidence. After all, he had encountered a monster before, Loi of the Eastern Sage Heaven. If there were monsters like Loi among the Nirvana realm's 7th and 8th realms, Wuk couldn't avoid a tough battle. Besides, there was one more thing. They came to the Sword World not only to help Wuk forge the Celestial Wheel, but also to find out the whereabouts of the Martial Lord Great Ancestor. According to the rumors of the 3 sword realms, the martial god's whereabouts were unpredictable. Unless he wanted to show himself, it would be difficult to know where he was. The only way Qin Hao could think of was to stand out as much as possible and make a name for himself. After the martial god appeared in the sword world, he continuously challenged countless famous sword gods in the 3 sword realms. As long as Qin Hao's name was loud enough and their strength was monstrous enough, the martial god would definitely come out. Chapter 2048. Atop the Big Dipper Mountain, after the Big Dipper Righteous Testimonial Ceremony, the name of Cold Sword Emperor began to spread far and wide. This was the elegant title that the cultivators of the Divine Realm had given to Flawless. A sword cultivator from the West Capital that didn't reveal his true strength had actually crushed the core disciple of the Southern Courtyard, 7 Wings. This matter caused a ripple in the Divine Region. No one could understand how a core disciple of the 4 great powers could be defeated by a nameless person. When this matter spread, it seemed to confirm the original intention of the Academy to hold the Sword Conference. There was no lack of swordsmanship geniuses in the divine world of Avicii. It was just that they had yet to appear. But once they appeared, they were defeated in the West Capital. This incident was a wake-up call for all the forces in the divine realm. Many powerful people in the Heavenly Wheel realm paid too much attention to the cultivators in their sects and neglected the talents buried in other places in the divine realm. Taking advantage of the fact that there was still some time before the Sword Conference of the Academy, a storm was brewing in the divine realm. All the orthodoxies began to try their best to find outstanding talents, hoping that when the Sword Conference of the Academy arrived, they could replace their sects and enter the divine realm. However, it would be extremely difficult for the orthodoxies to find a satisfactory batch of talents in this storm of signs. Even if there were, it would be impossible for them to be like Wuk. West Capital, Heavenly Tome Pavilion. Zien and the others had been quietly cultivating here, comprehending the divine will of the Divine Lord of Avicii. The ancient book floating on the altar contained the power of the great world's heavenly path. If one wanted to integrate into the great world and not be suppressed or rejected by the heavenly path, they had to put their own will and divine power into it. However, Zien and the others' situation was obviously not as good as Shao Han, Quangtang, and the Illusion Elder. The divine light flowing on their bodies could not merge with the ancient book. The Kunlun continent's alchemy Tao was established. Zien and the others were not born in the original realm and had never felt the power of space and sword. No matter how hard they tried, it was impossible for them to understand these 2 divine paths in a short time. Shao Han was different from Quangtang. The origin realm contained everything in the universe. When the divine wilderness continent was born, it contained the spatial and sword Tao attribute. Even if any life form that was born did not cultivate these 2 great Taos, their bodies would be tainted with their auras. Therefore, when Xiao Han was comprehending the ancient book, the aura of the original realm that flowed on her body quickly merged into the ancient book. Even her will and spiritual soul were brought into the book. They roamed freely in the world of the book, reflecting each other's brilliance and resonating with the will of the way. At this moment, Qin Hao's body shone with a holy light. His divine will intertwined with the ancient book. Mysterious characters flew out from the book and landed on his body, merging with his flesh and Tianlun. Gradually, the light on his body became brighter and brighter. Vaguely, it seemed to have triggered a strong reaction with the ancient book. Xin seemed to have sensed something. He opened his eyes and glanced at Qin Hao. He smiled and nodded. This kid was actually using the heavenly path world's power contained in the ancient book to try to condense the second type of Tianluan divine power, the spatial divine power. Not only Qin Hao, but Wux's body was also surging with sword radiance. The nomological aura that filled the air became stronger and stronger. During this period of time, they had been cultivating in the heavenly book pavilion. Their progress was clearly faster than when they were cultivating in the Kunlun Sea. After all, they are life forms of the original realm. They are blessed by the wilderness and have a unique advantage. Xin thought to himself. The life forms of the original realm had extremely powerful spiritual root. This was something life forms with imperfections in the heavenly path could not compare to. As long as Qin Hao and Wuk were given some nourishment to absorb, they would be able to grow rapidly. The spatial and sword Tao powers contained in the infinite divine world were exactly what the two of them needed at the moment. Buzz! A sword cry came from Wuk's body. A beam of sword will suddenly shot out and disappeared above Qin Hao's protective divine light. It seemed to have invaded his divine will. At this time, Qin Hao was comprehending the great path of space in the ancient book. His spiritual soul seemed to have left his body and entered another world. He was sitting in the center of a huge and boundless divine book. The divine book was extremely vast. The pages of the book turned into heaven and earth. Ancient characters floated between heaven and earth. They contained powerful spatial will and constantly floated before his eyes. Suddenly, a beam of sword light broke into the heaven and earth in the book. It turned into a figure standing there, looking at Qin Hao, who was meditating and cultivating. Qin Hao slowly opened his eyes and smiled at Wuk. He raised his hand and waved forward. The ancient characters that floated between heaven and earth collapsed and disappeared one after another. The space rumbled, and a powerful force began to surge. Like an undercurrent, it surged toward Wuk's body. Wuk's eyes narrowed slightly. Sword light shot out from his pupils. The sword will left his body and turned into thousands of divine swords. They covered the sky and the sun. They covered the firmament like an upside-down mountain. They crashed down with the attack of the great path. The space continued to collapse and was pierced by the sword light. The undercurrent collapsed upon contact. In the next moment, the sword peak fell directly on Qin Hao's head. "Look at what you can do," Qin Hao said. He raised his head and looked up. Lines appeared in his eyes as his pupils flickered with the radiance of flames. Suddenly, a vast and mighty divine will swept out. The cracked space suddenly healed. In the heavens and earth, there seemed to be a rhythm that enveloped the inverted sword mountain. A miraculous scene happened. The falling sword peak stopped. The thousands of divine swords actually moved with the power between heaven and earth. They were like dancing notes. Sometimes they separated and turned into two sword matrices. Other times, they gathered together and turned into a circle. Wuk's sword will seem to change according to Qin Hao's will. Divine power of space, Wuk said. How long had it been? Qin Hao borrowed the power of the ancient book and gradually mastered the divine power of space. He was becoming more and more mature. It seems that you are not far from condensing the second divine power. The same goes for you. Qin Hao waved his hand gently. The power of space that enveloped the sword peak disappeared. The thousands of sword light disappeared at the same time. The order of the ancient book was restored. Ancient characters reappeared and floated in front of them. Qin Hao got up. He stepped out of the void and created ripples. He came in front of Wuk and asked, "How much longer?" He could feel from Wuk's sword will that Wuk's precepts had surpassed the limit of the 8th level. He was very close to the divine gate. Perhaps with just a thought, he could become a sword god. The longest is 30 years. The shortest is maybe a few days. Wuk looked up at the heaven and earth in the book. He looked at the countless floating characters. In addition to the will of space, these characters also contained powerful sword will. He sighed. It's like a dream. From the time he came to the divine wilderness and passed through the Dongwang realm to the current Great Path Sword realm, it had been less than 100 years. However, he had already advanced from the lower Nirvana realm to the peak Nirvana realm. The divine gate was already open in front of him. He could already see the light behind the gate. Wuk's speed of improvement was astonishing. Perhaps the time he took to enter the divine path was even faster than Zhan Wu, who stayed in the divine wilderness. Of course, this could not have happened without the help of many people. Kunlun Haizin, Daisakong, and the sword will power of the seamless world. It's okay for now. Cultivation ends here. Before the Academy Sword Conference begins, don't cultivate anymore. Go out. Qin Hao patted Wuk's shoulder. Wuk nodded. He understood. Qin Hao wanted him to calm down and not to become a god in advance. Buzz. In the Heavenly Book Pavilion, the light that enveloped Qin Hao and Wuk dissipated. The two opened their eyes. It seems that the results of your cultivation are not bad. Although Ziyin did not enter the spiritual world of the two, he could guess from their auras that they should have fought just now. Senior brother, Wuk only needs an opportunity to become a god. I told him to wait until after the Academy Sword Conference to forge the Heavenly Wheel. Qin Hao said, "There are many extraordinary seniors in the Academy. They can help Wuk condense extraordinary sword will power and greatly improve the Heavenly Wheel's grade." Ziyin agreed and asked, "What about you? I see that your space divine will is rich. You should be able to condense the second divine force soon." Qin Hao smiled and replied, "The heavenly path environment of the seamless world is very suitable for you to cultivate. However, don't be complacent. Let's not talk about Wuk first. You have many Tao wills in your body. Don't waste your innate talent." Ziyin said, "Try to condense the tranquil water into divine force. It might be more useful to you than the space great path." The last time Qin Hao had been dragged out by Si Huan, he had encountered great danger. When he returned, the situation had indeed frightened Ziyin greatly. However, it was also because of this that he understood some things. The potential of the nether tranquil water to condense divine power was, in fact, higher than the way of space. Junior 3, as an alchemist, you should know the importance of vigorous life. Its strength will bring about an overall improvement. The strength of your divine force, the strength of your divine soul, and even the power of your divine techniques will be affected. You must listen to Ziyin's words. Divine Lord Taichu said, "I will remember." Qin Hao accepted the advice. Vigorous life was indeed very important to cultivation. The stronger one's life force, the stronger one's flesh and bones. After reaching the divine level, it would naturally affect the strength of one's divine soul and divine force. Qin Hao did not want to waste the tranquil water. It was just that he needed time to cultivate. How long had it been since he entered the divine path? A few days ago, young Master C came and seemed to be looking for you. Seeing that you were immersed in cultivation, he did not want to disturb you. Since you are done cultivating, go back to the Sikong residence and have a look. Ziyin said. Okay. Qin Hao knew that the little overlord of the West Capital was never an idle person. If he came to the Heavenly Book Pavilion to look for him, There must be something. Xiao Han, you have been cultivating here for a long time. Come out and get some fresh air. Wuk said to Xiao Han. Xiao Han shook his head and glanced at Qin Hao. I want to stay and cultivate. You guys go ahead. After that, he closed his eyes. Sword wool flickered on his body. Xiao Han once again immersed himself in comprehending the ancient book. Let's go. Qin Hao said and left the heavenly book pavilion with Wuk. He is a little cold. Why don't you persuade him? Wuk felt that Qin Hao was wrong. If I could persuade him, would I need you to remind me? Qin Hao knew Xiao Han's temper very well. At this time, she felt like the girl in Qiutian town of the Jiang kingdom. Qin Hao knew that Xiao Han was very dissatisfied with her strength. In particular, Wuk was also about to step into the divine path, which made her have a stronger impulse to improve. It was impossible to persuade her. Then you should spend more time with her. Do you know that you are like a scumbag now? Wu Kei stood up for the injustice. You are the scumbag. Han and I are old man's wives. What about you? Since you left Kunlun, you have been ignoring Xiao He. That day on the Big Dipper Mountain, you kept looking at Fairy Dong. Tell me, have you taken a fancy to someone? You like the new and hate the old. You are a scumbag. Qin Hao said angrily. Get lost. Wuk was too lazy to pay attention to him. Was he the kind of person who liked the new and hated the old? However, Fairy Qingrong was indeed very strong. Chapter 2049. Back to the Sikong residence. The atmosphere in the residence was different from usual. The halls were tidy, and the floor seemed to have been washed several times. Looking up, one would find that the floor was sparkling and spotless. The garden and corridors were all brand new. Even the patrolling guards were not smiling as usual. Instead, they looked extremely serious. The entire Sikong residence was filled with a strong sense of solemnity. A big shot is here, Qin Hao said. Lord Li, young Master Si has been looking for you for many days. He is currently in the Sikong Hall. A guard hurried forward when he saw Qin Hao return. Qin Hao nodded slightly and went straight to the Sikong Hall with Wuk. In the distance, a string of laughter could be heard from the hall. I am Li Chuji. I am here to pay my respects to Senior Sikong. In order not to disturb others, Qin Hao stopped at the door of the hall. Third Junior Chu, you are back. Come in and have a seat. The laughter in the hall gradually stopped. Daisakong's deep voice could be heard. Qin Hao and Wuk looked at each other and then stepped in. In front of them, Daisakong, Si Huan, and Commander Zhang Fei were all there. In addition, there was a middle-aged couple. The couple had an extraordinary bearing. They faintly emitted sword essence, which was restrained. Their attainments were extraordinary. At first glance, one could tell that they were not ordinary people. Qin Hao's gaze fell on the middle-aged man. To his surprise, he found that his facial features carried a trace of Daisakong's charm. Then, he looked at the woman beside the man. She was holding Si Huan's hand and talking intimately. She looked at Si Huan with doting eyes. In an instant, Qin Hao guessed the other party's identity. Third junior brother, these are my parents. Si Huan stood up in front of the woman and pointed at the couple. Greetings to Tianyang Kenshin. Qin Hao and Wuk cupped their hands in salute. Tianyang Kenshin, the son of Daisakong, was born dazzling and was favored by the Divine Master. He entered the academy to further his studies when he was young and became a divinity in 300 years. He cultivated many sword skills. He was now an elder of the academy. Qin Hao had stayed in Si Huan's residence for quite some time. He was very close to Si Huan, and often heard him talk about his parent. Tianyang Kenshin's situation was completely different from Si Huan's. Perhaps fate had played a trick on him. His son had a fatal illness, but he had an extremely talented father. The heavenly wheel that Tianyang Kenshin forged was of the immortal grade. Almost everyone in the divinity realm knew about Tianyang Kenshin's power. Therefore, on the day of the Big Dipper testimonial ceremony, when they learned that Si Huan had a fatal illness and might not become a divinity in his lifetime, the orthodoxies reacted so strongly. Si Huan's father was too eye-catching. He had cultivated with the Divine Master since he was young and spent most of his life in the academy. Basically, he was the adopted son of the Divine Master of Infinity. Yorli Chuji, the one who helped Huan vent her anger on the Big Dipper Mountain? Tianyang Kenshin smiled and said in a gentle tone, Senior Sikong took care of me and my family, so I couldn't let anyone humiliate young Master Si. However, it wasn't me who did it, but my brother. Qin Hao nudged Wuk. Wuk stepped forward and said, Junior Show Wuk greets Tianyang Kenshin and Lady Swordsman. Don't be nervous, little guy. You helped Huan vent her anger. We should be thanking you. Moreover, I'm not just a decorative vase. I'm also a celestial wheel realm cultivator. Lady Tianyang said. My wife is from the Lu clan of the ancient god clan in the divinity realm. She's the princess of the Willow Divine Kingdom. Zhang Ji said with a smile. Otherwise, how could an ordinary woman walk together with the son of Daisakong? They must be a perfect match for each other in terms of talent and status. Princess, senior swordsman. Wuk was shocked. Ha! Everyone was amused. Lady Tianyang smiled and said, That was in the past. Now I'm Si Huan's mother and Tianyang's wife. Princess and Senior Tianyang must have had many unforgettable experiences when you were young. Qin Hao seemed to see himself and Xiao Han in the two. On the third day of the lunar calendar, you were in seclusion in the Heavenly Book Pavilion for a long time. Some things happened in the divinity realm, mainly the Sword Conference of the Academy. Not long after Severing Love left that day, the Academy issued a decree and set the date of the Sword Conference. Daisakong said, The Sword Conference will begin in 7 days? Wuk was shocked. So soon? Yes. Tianyang Kenshin nodded. This Sword Conference is very important. It concerns the stability of the Wujian realm. The Great Path Sword Realm is divided into 3 realms. You should know that. Qin Hao and Wuk nodded. In the 3 realms, Wujian was the last to start, and its foundation is the weakest. In terms of cultivation talents, it is naturally not as good as Rikujinji and Zhenlong's sword realm. This seems normal, but it will affect the Divine Master himself. The Seamless Academy used to be a speck of dust in the cracks between God Lu's realm and True Dragon's realm. Thanks to the rise of Divine Lord Seamless, the Seamless Academy wasn't acknowledged by the other 2 sword realms. God Lord Lu and Lord Dragon believed that the Academy had stolen the power of their sword realms. In fact, to this very day, the 2 God Lords have never treated Sword God Seamless as an equal. Tianyang Kenshin said. But the truth is the truth. The Divine Master opened up a realm with his own strength. His cultivation is right there. Qin Hao did not know why Tianyang Kenshin said this. In short, whether they recognized it or not, as long as Divine Master Wujian did not fall, the swordless realm would not disappear. On the other hand, as long as Divine Master Wujian did not die, Divine Master Wujian would be the Divine Master, like Divine Master Lu and Dragon Master. What could the other party do? Tianyang Kenshin shook his head. What you see is only the surface. The history of the Great Path Sword Realm is very long. It cannot be explained in a short time. If it wants to prosper in the Untainted Land, it is only a matter of time before the 3 realms merge. In fact, Divine Master Wujian does not reject it. The merging of the 3 realms. Qin Hao was not only astonished. He looked at the sky sun sword deity and seemed to understand something from his eyes. Sword deity Avicii did not reject the offer. Then, was the master of the 3 realms going to create a divine king? The seamless realm will disappear sooner or later. Or rather, it will exist in a different form. This might be shocking news to you, but remember, the strength of the seamless sword cultivator will determine its position in the sword realm of the Great Tao. Do you understand? Tianyang Kenshin said. Understood. Qin Hao and Wuk replied. Since the three realms merged and became the sword realm, it could explain why the Academy was so eager to recruit talent. Behind the Great Path sword realm, there was indeed something unknown. Or perhaps the three realms were originally one. Release your sword spirit for me to see. At this moment, Tianyang Kenshin said to Wuk. Yes, Senior. Wuk took a few steps forward and formed a sword spell with his palms. Sword will surged around him. A sword lotus of the Great Path appeared between his palms, emitting dazzling golden light. When this light appeared, the entire hall was covered in a layer of sacred golden light. Then, the sword lotus bloomed. A sharp light, as small as a needle, floated in the center of the lotus. It was shining all over. Tianyang Kenshin and Lady Tianyang's expressions changed slightly. They stared seriously at the sword lotus in Wuk's palms, feeling the sword spirit and sword will that floated in the center of the lotus. After a long time, they nodded slightly. It's done. Tianyang Kenshin said. Wuk's sword will returned to his divine body, and the hall returned to normal. He released his life spirit and sword spirit of all manifestations, but there was still one sword spirit that he did not reveal. Seniors, what do you think? Qin Hao asked. Tianyang and his wife were elders of the Academy and were close to the Divine Lord and several elders. This time, they returned to see Wuk's sword spirit. Si Huan must have played a role in this. Now that Tianyang and his wife had seen Wuk's life spirit and sword spirit, Qin Hao was inexplicably nervous. Very good. His way of the sword is pure and his sword will is indestructible. No wonder the 7 wings of the South Campus lost so badly. Even if 3 7 wings combined, he could not win. Lady Tianyang commented, he is stronger than me. Then she looked at her husband. In the Academy, Tianyang's status was very high. Basically, all the matters of the Academy were decided by him. Unless there was a crisis, there was no need to disturb the elders or the Divine Lord. He could make the decision alone. Although the Academy did not have a real dean, Tianyang's position now was equivalent to that of the dean. The younger generation is promising. Tianyang Kenshin did not say too much. He only mentioned Wuk. Then, Qin Hao wanted to say something but stopped. From the looks of it, Wuk was qualified to enter the Academy. The Heavenly Sun Sword God waved his hand and said with a smile, my opinion does not represent the Academy. There are many elders of the Sword Peak in the Academy. Above the elders there are 6 founding elders. Senior Severing Emotions is only one of them. Above the founding elders there is God Master Avicii. The 6 elders and the Divine Lord of Infinity were the 7 leaders who founded the Academy. Oh, stop being so wishy-washy. Can he enter or not? Just give me a straight answer. Si Huan shouted. Tianyang Kenshin reached out and slapped the back of Si Huan's head. He said with a dark expression, you little brat. You have no respect for your elders. Why did you hit my son? You hit the back of his head. Si Huan could not enter the Divine Ascension stage because of you. Lady Tianyang glared at her husband. Mother. Si Huan covered the back of his head with his hand, looking aggrieved. In the 3rd year of junior high school, Tianyang does have enough say in the Academy, but it does not mean that he can break the rules of the Academy at will. This time, it was Si Huan who forced me to come here. I know that you have crossed realms and want to forge an extraordinary sword wheel. The old man is also willing to help. However, you still have to follow the will of the Divine Lord and follow the rules of the Academy. Daisakong said. I understand. Qin Hao nodded. It seemed that Wuk still had to go through the sword competition. But since Tianyang Kenshin said that the younger generation could be expected, did it mean that from a personal standpoint, he had already agreed and approved of Wuk? It is my honor to be able to see the abilities of the thousands of sword cultivators in the sword world. I will participate in the sword competition. Wuk said. Tianyang Kenshin nodded with a smile. This child had extraordinary talent in swordsmanship and was a good person. Don't worry. Even if Wuk can't enter the academy, the old man can accept him as a disciple on behalf of Tianyang. A personal disciple, not a disciple of the academy. Daisakong interrupted. Father, you. Tianyang Kenshin was anxious. He did not say that he wanted to accept a disciple. What? Can't I make the decision? Daisakong's face fell. No. What I mean is, the power of the flawless sword Dao is rare, and it crushed those coquettish people in the southern courtyard with a flick of the finger. Since you want to vent your anger for Huaner, you have to do something, right? Daisakong was very dissatisfied with Tianyang Kenshin's attitude. A man should repay kindness. That was the style of the West capital. Then, Daisakong said to Wuk, Kid, go ahead and compete in the sword competition. Tianyang's skills may not be as good as the 6 founding elders of the academy, or me or Lord Beidou, but his swordsmanship is better than all of us. He has the greatest potential. It won't be a waste for you to learn swordsmanship from him. I wouldn't dare, Wuk hurriedly said. It was his fortune to have an immortal-grade sword god as his master. Tianyang Kenshin was probably the strongest sword cultivator in the sword world below the Divine Master. Hearing this, Tianyang Kenshin smiled helplessly. I'll do as you say, Father. In fact, I don't have any intention of accepting a disciple. After all, I'm much less qualified than the founding elders. What are you waiting for? Qin Hao transmitted his voice to Wuk. Disciple Wuk is pleased to meet you, Master. Wuk bowed deeply and was about to kneel. Don't worry. Tianyang Kenshin stopped him. If you can't pass the Academy's test, you can do the ceremony later. If he passed, the Academy would send someone suitable to teach Wuk. By then, it might not be Tianyang. Brother Chu, release your sword soul and show it to my parents, Si Huan suddenly said. His words caught the attention of Tianyang and his wife. They looked at Qin Hao as if they were waiting. I'll pass. I won't participate in the sword competition. Qin Hao grinned. He was an alchemist. Swordsmanship was not his forte. What a dog. Wuk mumbled to himself. Chapter 2050. 7 days later, the Academy's sword conference officially began. When this day arrived, the entire seamless world was in an uproar. Countless cultivators from the continents set off, transforming into beautiful streams of light as they shuttled through the stars, rushing towards the core of the divine realm, the seamless divine region. In fact, Qin Hao and the others received the news relatively late because they were too engrossed in cultivation. Fortunately, the West capital was located in the divine region and was very close to the academy. They weren't like the cultivators from other planes who had to travel through the boundless void. Otherwise, they might not be able to make it in time. The scale is really large. Xiaohan looked around. The world was filled with cultivators. The scene was much more shocking than when they first arrived in the divine region. Without exception, these cultivators were all heading towards the core of the divine region, the academy. The seamless divine region radiates out to tens or even close to 100 continents. Now that the geniuses from all the continents are gathered in the divine region, it's naturally more lively than usual. Xian's expression was calm, but his heart was filled with emotions. The core of a great world was indeed not something Kunlun could compare to. The grand occasion here far surpassed the Kunlun Sea meeting. Wuk, you have to work hard. The people in front of you are the most monstrous sword geniuses in the entire seamless world. These people will trap you like a huge net, sealing off all exits. You have to work hard. When Divinity Taichu was preaching the Tao, they had mobilized a lot of people, crossing over from the heavenly barrier, just for Wuck to become a god with a single sword strike. Junior will definitely do my best. Wuck stood in the air above the Seekong Manor, looking at the black mass of sword cultivators with an extremely serious expression. He could sense countless sword intents gathering in the divine region, and each of them was extremely outstanding. He couldn't help but feel a trace of excitement in the depths of his heart. Would his sword be able to pierce through the heavens and stab towards the academy? Let's go, Daisakong said. He was dressed in an elegant white divine robe as he stepped on the void, walking forward. Behind him, the guards of the West Capital followed. Their divine might was vast and mighty, and from afar, they gave off a heavy sense of pressure. Although Wuck was the only one going to the academy today, the Seekong family still sent out all their elites to boost their prestige. Generally speaking, the West Capital should also send someone to participate in the sword conference of the academy. Since Daisakong used to be the servant of the Divine Lord, he should take the lead in responding to the Divine Lord's call. However, it was difficult for Si Huan to stand out in this generation of the Western capital, and there were no particularly outstanding talents among his trusted followers. The arrival of the people from Kunlun Si made up for the regret in Daisakong's heart. Wuck's swordsmanship was extraordinary, and he could represent the Western capital to participate in the Academy's sword conference. Daisakong was naturally happy. Just as he'd said earlier, even if Wuck wasn't a direct descendant of the Seekong estate, he was still willing to help. It could be considered as helping each other out. As for the future, he didn't think too much about it and didn't expect Wuck to repay him. Unfortunately, there was only one person, Qin Hao. Thinking of this, Daisakong said to the silver-haired young man beside him, "Are you really not going to participate?" Qin Hao kept saying that he was a divine alchemist and not good at swordsmanship. However, Daisakong was very shrewd and had a strong sense of perception. He could tell at a glance whether he was good at swordsmanship or not. The sword style in Qin Hao's body was no less than that of Wuck, not to mention the Eastern Sky Immortal. After taking Qing Rong's palm, Daisakong was sure that Qin Hao's celestial wheel was definitely not ordinary. It was really a pity that this kid didn't participate in the sword conference. I have many great ways and have other things to do. As long as Wuck can enter the academy and learn the supreme divine method of swordsmanship, it's enough. Qin Hao answered with a smile. His tone was calm, as if there was no trace of pity or regret. "Kid, you really don't know what's good for you. Forget it, it's precious to be firm in your own Tao. No matter where you are in the future, remember that there's a Seekong residence in the infinite divine realm. It's not big, but it's enough for you to rest and shelter you from the wind and rain." Daisakong sighed. From Qin Hao's words, he could tell that his ambition was not in the infinite divine realm. Perhaps he would leave after the sword conference. Yes. Qin Hao nodded. He could feel a rare warmth from Senior Seekong. No matter where he was, there was a Seekong residence in the infinite divine realm for him to rest and shelter him from the wind and rain. Senior Seekong clearly saw him as one of his own. At this moment, the West Capital team flew through the air. Along the way, they passed by many strong cultivators. There were forces from the realm of the gods, as well as forces from outside the realm of the god. The strong cultivators with surging sword intent and divine light were obviously the rulers of the heavenly Tao. Now, many of the rulers of the heavenly Tao had brought their disciples to the infinite divine realm to participate in the sword conference. This scene caused ripples in the hearts of Zien and the others. The infinite divine realm was indeed different from the other divine realms. There was no obvious suppression of divine authority. The cultivators in the infinite divine realm could come and go freely. Such authority was almost impossible to find outside the infinite divine realm. If it was in heaven's wall, unless the divine Lord summoned them, even the rulers couldn't leave their posts and step into the divine realm. Not to mention, there were so many people on the Tao of Emperors. The infinite divine sword's ruling philosophy was more humane. Of course, it was also because the other party had overwhelming strength. Daisakong. In the distance, a group of figures flew over. The leader was an old man with a dignified face. He wore a Taoist robe with yin and yang diagrams flowing on it. His aura was unfathomable. Qin Hao looked over and saw two familiar faces standing behind the old man. They were Cheng Huai of the Southern Institute and the #1 sword cultivator of the younger generation, Nangong Miao. In that case, the identity of the old man was clear. He was the dean of the Southern Institute. Dean Nan, long time no see. Daisakong said. The Western capital and the Southern Institute were both in the divine realm, and the big shots rarely interacted with each other. Yes, it's been a while since we met. Daisakong's Western capital is full of heroes. I wonder who injured Qi that day. Dean Nan said calmly with an interrogative tone. It's said that the Southern Institute's heavenly cycle sword technique is ingenious and boundless, so I couldn't help but want to learn a thing or two from it. I didn't expect to accidentally injure Brother Qi. Please forgive me, Wuk said. Cheng Huai and many other disciples showed a look of anger. The first half of the sentence was praising the Southern Institute's heavenly cycle sword technique, and the second half was saying that it was an accidental injury. Then, was it the Southern Institute's sword technique that was stronger? Or was it sarcasm? If it was really strong, how could he so easily injure Qi? Who was he looking down on? Accidental injury? Dean Nan's expression darkened, and a mighty divine power whizzed out from his body. His yin-yang Taoist robe fluttered, and invisibly, it fell on Wuk. Wuk groaned and staggered back. He felt as if there was an incomparably powerful sword wool between heaven and earth that directly pierced his spirit. The scene in front of Wuk changed, and he was in a terrifying starry sky world. There were many sharp and ferocious divine swords, huge and boundless, hanging in the sky. The sword light pierced through the 9 heavens, as if any one of them could kill him on the spot. Dean Nan, what are you doing? Daisakong shouted, and his voice surged out, dragging Wuk's consciousness out of the starry sky world. Then, a powerful palm fell on Wuk's shoulder, stabilizing his body. It was the commander of the Western capital, Zhang Ji. Are you okay? Zhang Ji asked with concern. Thank you, brother commander. Wuk said, looking at Dean Nan. The old man's sword will was very terrifying, and facing him was like facing an invincible giant. Since he said that the heavenly cycle sword technique of the Southern capital is powerful, the old man couldn't help but teach him a lesson. Daisakong's eyes are sharp, and he didn't misjudge him. He's a good kid, Dean Nan praised with a smile, but his tone was cold. As the dean of the Southern capital, you have the nerve to teach a junior? Daisakong shouted. Moreover, Wuk had not even forged the heavenly wheel, and was only an emperor sword cultivator. I'm just sensing a junior's ability, Daisakong. Why are you so angry? Dean Nan said nonchalantly. Dean Nan, Wuk is a sword cultivator nominated by the Western capital, and he will participate in the upcoming sword conference. If you injure him before the sword conference, and the Academy pursues the matter, how do you intend to bear the consequences? Zhang Ji asked. Headmaster Nan's expression changed, revealing a tinge of fear. However, seeing that Wuk was safe and sound, the smile returned to his face. If that's the case, then I'll congratulate the student of the great Minister of Public Works in advance. With that, the Southern Capital's team left in front of the Western Capital and headed for the Academy. Heavenly Wheel Verification Sword Field, I'll be waiting for you. Nangong Miao shouted at Qin Hao before leaving, chasing after the Southern Capital's team. Wuk was a Nirvana Sword Emperor, and it was impossible for him to encounter Nangong Miao. Therefore, the other party targeted Qin Hao, hoping to encounter him. I'm sorry, I won't be participating in the sword conference, Qin Hao replied. Nangong Miao's body suddenly swayed as if he had been struck by something. When he turned his head, there was a ball of anger on his face. He wanted to vent his anger but couldn't, so he could only leave resentfully. "Ha!" The Western capital's guards laughed. "You were fine, right?" Qin Hao said to Wuk with a cold expression. The Southern capital actually dared to attack Wuk. "Thankfully, Senior Sikong woke me up. It was a false alarm," Wuk said. Now that he thought about it, his heart palpitated. The Southern capital wasn't weak. The weakest was Seven Wings. The Heavenly Cycle sword technique was something he had never seen before. It was indeed terrifying. If not for today's sword conference, I would definitely teach the Southern capital a lesson. I'll remember this debt. After the sword conference, I'll have a deep discussion with old bastard Nan. Daisakong's expression was ugly as well. His tone was filled with intense resentment. Qin Hao glanced at Daisakong. The rumors in the celestial domain were true. The senior was indeed protective. If not for the Divine Master's authority, Senior Sikong might have fought with Dean Nan. Furthermore, he even said that he would have a deep discussion with Dean Nan after the sword conference. "Let's go," Daisakong said as he took a step forward. The suppressive aura emanating from his body became extremely oppressive. Along the way, many heavenly Tao wielders who came to the celestial domain avoided him. They did not know which mighty figure he was and were afraid of angering him. Soon, the Western Capitals group arrived at the central region of the celestial domain and landed in front of a vast mountain gate. The mountain gate was extremely majestic as it pierced through the clouds. Immortal clouds swirled around it as though it was a heavenly gate. It made one feel reverence. "Seamless Academy," Qin Hao muttered as his heart trembled slightly. There was a divine stone beside the mountain gate. It wasn't large and was about 100 feet tall. It was surrounded by many green bamboos, and there were 4 large words engraved on it. Each word contained an extremely potent sword Tao power, as though it had been carved by a sword. At a glance, one's soul could be sucked into it. Chapter 2051. Sword-esque pagoda strands of light flashed in front of his eyes. Looking at the god stone, he suddenly felt a vast and boundless sword will gushing towards him. Within the 4 words, there seemed to be countless beams of sword light that intertwined and condensed into an imposing figure. The more he looked at it, the clearer the figure became. Qin Hao felt as if a swordsman had appeared in front of him. This swordsman was dressed in plain clothes, and his movements were extremely fast. He turned into countless afterimages as he flew. Every move he made was like a work of the gods that carved the heavenly Tao, leaving behind ancient proverbs on the divine stones. Tao is hidden within the words. Qin Hao's gaze changed. Traces of runes appeared in his eyes as he stared ahead, seemingly able to see through the essence of all things. His soul transformed into a strand of light, merging into the sword world of the swordsman. At this instant, he saw even more. "What's going on?" Zine sensed that Qin Hao was stunned. His body emitted a mysterious sword intent as strands of tribulation light flashed on the surface of his body, forming a connection with the words on the divine stone. Not only Qin Hao, even Wuk was the same. Wuk's golden light flashed as a gigantic sword lotus shadow enveloped Wuk. Standing in the shadow, Wuk's entire person seemed to have transformed into a divine sword. The 4 words on the divine stone were left behind by the sword god of Ichi. They contain the truth of the universe. The more outstanding a sword cultivator's talent is, the more real they would feel. However, everyone's reaction to the divine stone is different. The stronger they are, the more they would see. A voice drifted over from the side. Behind Fairy Qing Rong, there were many disciples of the Eastern Immortal Heaven. The one who spoke was none other than Loi. "Daisakong," Fairy Qing Rong greeted. "Qing Rong, you guys are here." Daisakong laughed lightly. Although Fairy Qing Rong's seniority seemed lower than the four hegemons, her experience wasn't low at all. She was the first to follow the immortal Lord Dongsheng. Ever since the immortal Lord Dongsheng became a god and his name resounded throughout the divine realm, Qing Rong had been his disciple. At that time, there were only the two of them in the eastern celestial heaven. In terms of age, she wasn't much younger than Daisakong, who was the Divine Lord's personal attendant back then. However, the Divine Lord had ordered Daisakong to leave his side and establish his own business. As for Fairy Qing Rong, she had always accompanied her master in the eastern immortal heaven. Otherwise, with Qing Rong's cultivation and strength, it was enough for the divine realm to have another overlord. Daisakong, you're all here. As they spoke, the Northern Dipper Celestial arrived at the Northern Dipper Mountain with his disciples, gathering together with the disciples of the Western Capital and the Eastern Immortal Sky. The grandson of the Celestial Sovereign, congratulations. Daisakong asked. The Northern Dipper Skylord's expression stiffened. He sighed and said, "The old man has let Sikong down for what happened on the Northern Dipper Mountain that day." The Western Capital had gone to attend the ceremony to celebrate, and the Northern Dipper clan had exposed Si Huan's illness in front of everyone. Now, the entire divine realm knew about this matter. Let the juniors deal with their own matters. There's no need for us to take it to heart. Daisakong patted the Celestial Sovereign's shoulder. Old brother, don't take it to heart. Ai, unfilial grandson. The more Daisakong acted like this, the more ashamed the Celestial Sovereign felt. Qi too. At this moment, the light in Qin Hao's eyes dissipated as he regained his senses. He looked at the divine stone in front of the Seamless Academy and praised it repeatedly. It was just a piece of stone, yet it contained the incomparably profound and unparalleled Sword Tao. Feeling the sword intent within the character, Qin Hao's understanding and knowledge of the Sword Tao expanded by a lot, allowing him to see an even wider world. It's indeed powerful. Wuk nodded. Just now, he was so immersed in it that he couldn't extricate himself. If it weren't for the sword conference today, he would have stayed a little longer to carefully comprehend it. Xin, Tai Chu, and the others were at a loss. In front of them, the divine stone was just an ordinary piece of stone. They couldn't feel the Sword Tao contained within the character. Just a piece of divine stone is already so profound. I wonder what kind of world the Academy is like. Chizu had a look of yearning. Unfortunately, he couldn't participate in the Sword Conference and was destined not to become a member of the Academy. Daisakong, Celestial Sovereign, let's go in. Fairy Qing Rong said. The two nodded and stepped forward, walking side by side with Qing Rong. The disciples of the Western Capital, Big Dipper Mountain, and Eastern Immortal Sky followed behind the three. The forces of the three orthodoxies gathered together and were extremely powerful. The divine stone can withstand the sword will of a divine lord without disintegrating. It must be a rare treasure. There must be many treasures like this in the Academy. Maybe there are even more miracles that contain the Sword Tao. I'm a little tempted. Qin Hao followed the group. The Academy placed the divine stone at the entrance. Wasn't they afraid that it would be stolen? It's still not too late if you want to participate in the Sword Conference. Wuk said. If I participate, will you still have a chance to stand out? Forget it. Qin Hao shook his head repeatedly. He was still thinking about the divine stone and the figure of the swordsman dancing with his sword. If there was a chance, he wanted to try and secretly take it away. The battle that night was still undecided between us. I hope I can experience the true dragon howl of the dragon clan again today. Loi turned her head slightly, her frosty gaze landing on Qin Hao. Even if there were thousands of sword cultivators in the divine realm, in her eyes, there was only one opponent. Qin Hao felt an inexplicable chill. His body trembled slightly. He looked at Loi and said, "Fairy, what are you talking about? I don't understand at all." After that, Qin Hao dragged Wuk and hurried forward, leaving Loi far behind. Could it be that they had been recognized? Loi saw this and her expression was as cold as usual. Run? Since they had come to the sword conference ground, how could they run away? She was the disciple of the East Victory Immortal and had never been defeated since she became a divinity. What's over there? Xiao Han pointed in a direction. After passing through the mountain gate, they entered the academy. Looking around, it was a vast expanse. Sword peaks, divine rivers, Taoist temples, and operating divine sword matrices were everywhere. There were countless sacred sceneries. It was as if the academy was another independent world. At this moment, in the direction she was pointing, there was a tall tower. The blue ancient tower was divided into 9 floors. Each floor had 9 small windows, all of which were closed. Below the ancient tower, many swordsmen were gathered. Every time they walked past the tower, there would be a strange phenomenon. Either there would be the sound of swordsmanship, or the ancient tower would be lit up. It was very magical. That's the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda, Daisakong explained. He had lived here before and knew every blade of grass and tree of the academy like the back of his hand. Elder Sikong, is there anything special about the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda? Xiao Han was very curious about the strange phenomenon happening in the ancient tower. This is the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda. The divine soldier is enshrined inside. There are 9 weapons on each floor, all of which were used by my young master. Therefore, the pagoda gives birth to the way and can test the talent of swordsmen. When a swordsman releases sword will and walks past the pagoda, it will be sensed by the divine soldier inside. Therefore, the scene you see will happen. The ancient tower will be lit up. Daisakong's face was full of nostalgia. Many scenes of him walking with the infinite sword deity appeared in his mind. Back then, the young master was a genius. Every time he cultivated to a new level, he would change his weapon. Daisakong could not remember how many swords he had used in his life. Until he became the divine master, his young master had never used his sword again. Because there was no sword to use, and he could not find an opponent to use his sword on. The ancient pagoda has 9 floors. Each floor has 9 divine soldier and 81 divine sword. Wuk exclaimed. The seamless world was formed by the sword will of the infinite sword deity. The divine soldier carried the will of the divine master and the power of the world. Naturally, it could test the talent of swordsmen of the infinite sword deity. Since they were the swords of the divine master, one could imagine how extraordinary each one would be. Look, the dean of the South Yard is leading the disciples over, someone said excitedly. The disciples of the South Yard wanted to use the ancient pagoda to test their talent in swordsmanship. Let's go and take a look. Let's see how many sword tones the disciples of the South Yard can activate and how many floors of the ancient pagoda are lit up. Many people changed their path and headed towards the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda. In fact, there were many heavenly path controllers around the pagoda. Their disciples were also coming to the core of the divine plane for the first time. After entering the seamless academy, they could not help but admire the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda that enshrined the swords of the divine master. Senior sister, let's go and take a look, Loi said. Under her cold face, there was a hint of eagerness. It seemed that she also wanted to use the ancient pagoda to test her talent. Skylord Daisakong, shall we go together? Goddess Qingrong asked. Since we're passing by the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda, let's go take a look, the Skylord said and glanced at Beidou-yi. Beidou-yi was rubbing his fists and could not hold himself back. Let's go. Daisakong led the way. Since Dean Nan was going, he also wanted to see how talented the disciples of the South Yard were, especially Nangong Miao. Among the disciples of the South Yard who came to participate in the sword conference today, there were no 7-winged disciples. Perhaps they were too ashamed to come after being defeated by Wuk, or perhaps it was because of other reasons, but among all the disciples, Nangong Miao's talent was undoubtedly the most outstanding. Soon, the crowd arrived at the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda. At this time, a mighty sword sound spread out. Between heaven and earth, there was the sound of divine swords moving rhythmically. Then, the green ancient pagoda lit up. The first floor, the second floor, the third floor. The 9 windows on each floor flashed with the light of divine swords. This time, a total of 27 swords of the Divine Master were activated. Amazing! Someone looked at the cultivator who walked under the ancient pagoda. It was a young man in luxurious robes. Obviously, he was from a Divine Path clan. Lingbo Continent, a member of the Heavenly Path clan, Beidou Skylord said, recognizing the other person. The Lingbo clan was different from ordinary Heavenly Path clan. They were inherited by an aristocratic family. The young man who walked under the ancient pagoda was obviously not ordinary. He should be the current crown prince, the next Lingbo clan leader. At this time, another person walked under the ancient pagoda. As the sword sound spread, heaven and earth moved rhythmically. 2 floors of the ancient pagoda lit up. Moreover, the shadows of divine swords did not appear on all the 9 windows on the second floor. 17 swords, Qin Hao said. He looked at the cultivator below the ancient pagoda. The divine light of the heavenly wheel appeared on the other person's body. However, his talent was not as good as Crown Prince Lingbo's. This was the difference between an incomplete heavenly wheel and a great heavenly wheel. Next, many Heavenly Path clan leaders tested their talent. Some surpassed Crown Prince Lingbo, but even more were not as good as him. The power of the Sword Quest Pagoda was still very real. After all, it worshipped the divine soldier of God Wujian. At this time, Wuk asked Qin Hao, "Do you want to try?" "I'm not going to participate in the sword conference. You go." Qin Hao rubbed the tip of his nose indifferently. 7 wings go. Broaden their horizons. Suddenly, a dignified voice sounded from the field. Invisibly, the aura suppressed all public opinion. This caused many Heavenly Path clan leaders to look at the old man in the yin-yang Taoist robe. "Yes, Master." 7 wings strode forward. His posture was tall and straight, and his bearing was extraordinary. He approached the Sword Quest Pagoda step by step. Chapter 2052. Wukong Read Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Not many chances. Nangong Miao walked to the front of the ancient pagoda. His face was solemn, and his eyes flashed with sharpness. He looked up at the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda. In the blur, the cyan ancient pagoda stood like a giant sword, filled with a majestic aura of swordsmanship, which made people feel small. There were 9 levels of the sword pagoda, 9 swords on each level. The 81 swords here had witnessed the rise of the Divine Master from a weak person to a peerless Divine Master. Now, the 81 swords would also witness Nangong Miao's greatness. From this day on, his light would shine from this academy and radiate to the entire divine realm, making people admire him. Dong. Nangong Miao took a firm step forward. A circle of sword qi circled around his body, turning into a cyclone. At the same time, the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda seemed to have sensed it. There was a rhythmic sound of swords, like countless wind chimes swaying in the wind. The sound was crisp. The sword pagoda lit up. "Look!" Someone pointed at the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda. Everyone looked over and saw the sacred light spreading from the bottom of the sword pagoda to the top. The first level, the second level, the third level, reaching the height of Prince Lingbo in an instant. Moreover, the shadow of the divine sword appeared in every window on every floor. Nangong Miao took a step forward and triggered the 27 swords of the sword pagoda. This scene shocked many masters of the heavenly path outside the divine realm. They all looked at the disciples of the South Yard. Nangong Miao had walked out from these people. Was this the strength of the orthodoxy of the divine realm? Dean Nan smiled and nodded slightly, but his face was calm. He knew that Nangong Miao's performance was not limited to this. More swords of the divine master would be triggered by his disciple. At this time, Nangong Miao walked forward again. The sword will on his body became even stronger, turning into a gorgeous stream of light. He got closer and closer to the pagoda. The swordsmanship-seeking pagoda sensed the power of the sword will. The sacred light continued to climb up to the 4th level. However, the 9 sword windows on the 4th level did not immediately show shadows of swords. Instead, they lit up gradually. The process was much slower. Even so, in the end, all 9 swords still. 36 swords. A disciple of the South Yard was surprised. Senior brother Nangong Miao was indeed the best swordsman in the South Yard. It's just 36 swords, what's the fuss about? Dean Nan said calmly, continue watching. Carefully feel your senior brother Nangong's control over the sword intent. This kind of opportunity is rare. Yes, Academy Head. The disciples of the southern courtyard lowered their heads and said in unison. Their faces became extremely serious, as if Nangong Miao was their role model. Open! Nangong Miao Miao shouted. 4 levels of the sword pagoda lit up. At that moment, he felt that his body was not as strong as he wished. It was as if all the sword intent in his body had been emptied. He needed to increase his strength and break through his limit. Whoosh! A strand of divine light shot out from Nangong Miao's body and turned into a slender leaf that floated above his head. The leaf was like a sword that shone with a cold light, radiating with a terrifying sharpness. Sword Soul. The moment the sword spirit was activated, the sword intent released by Nangong Miao became even more intense. Threads of light flew out from his position and poured into the ancient pagoda. Gradually, the light that had stopped at the 4th floor extended up to the 5th floor. 5th floor, 45 swords, someone exclaimed. As Nangong Miao's sword intent kept attacking the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda, the shadows of divine swords appeared on the 9 sword windows on the 5th floor one after another. Through the windows, tens of thousands of swords were reflected. In an instant, the expressions of the strong cultivators in the area changed. They had both entered the divine realm and their celestial wheels were of the same grade, with one pattern of the saint grade. However, Crown Prince Lingbo had only lit up 3 levels, while Nangong Miao had activated 45 swords from the 5th. The gap was huge. At that moment, Crown Prince Lingbo, who was next to the heavenly law controller of the Lingbo continent, looked extremely embarrassed. He stared at Nangong Miao under the ancient pagoda and was shocked. A strong sense of inferiority rose in his heart. Nangong Miao was like a mountain in front of him that he could only look up to. Not bad. Seeing this, College Chief Nan finally praised. However, Nangong Miao seemed to still have energy left. His trembling body continued to move forward. Every step was difficult, as if he was under great pressure. His slightly pale face was covered with sweat, which gradually soaked his clothes. When he arrived at the bottom of the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda, Nangong Miao roared. A wheel of light whistled and bloomed. Endless sword chi surged from his body, causing his long hair to dance wildly. The rolling sword chi madly surged into the ancient pagoda, and a dense sound of swords rang out in the void. Buzz! In a corner of the 6th floor, the shadow of a divine sword was imprinted on a window. 46 swords. Senior brother Nangong is amazing. The disciples of the South Yard cheered loudly. Nangong Miao's performance had completely crushed Crown Prince Lingbo's result. It was a little embarrassing. However, after 46 swords, Nangong Miao had also reached his limit. Whether it was his spiritual soul, sword soul, or physical body, they were all extremely weak. He almost couldn't stand still and fell to the ground. As the sword intent dissipated in time, the light on the 6th floor of the sword pagoda also dimmed. This disciple is useless. I can only reach this step. Nangong Miao was sweating all over. He returned to Jiang Dao, who was beside Dean Nan. There was no trace of modesty on his proud face. Well, you have some small achievements. You need to continue to work hard in the future. Dean Nan waved his sleeve, and Nangong Miao's sweat evaporated. He felt a mighty sword intent enter his body, replenishing his energy. His weak appearance returned to his best state. "Grandfather, I'll try," said Bei Doi. "Go," Bei Doi said calmly. He turned to Daisakong and asked, "Brother, what do you think of Nangong Miao?" The sword intent had lit up the 6th floor of the sword pagoda. Although only one sword had lit up on the 6th floor, it had triggered 46 swords. It was probably the highest result today. "Not bad," Daisakong replied indifferently. In Nangong Miao's realm, his talent wasn't too bad. It wasn't too outstanding, but it wasn't ordinary either. Daisakong knew that any of the disciples that the academy had recruited before was better than Nangong Miao in swordsmanship. There was even a disciple with one saint pattern who had lit up 7 floors of the sword pagoda and triggered 63 swords when he entered the academy. If Nangong Miao's result was compared to Crown Prince Lingbo, the latter was indeed unsightly. However, compared to the academy's disciple who had lit up 7 floors with 63 swords, was he worthy of being outstanding? In the cultivation of swordsmanship, there was always a higher mountain. The entire cultivation world was like this. Everyone thought that Nangong Miao was talented because they hadn't seen a more outstanding swordsman. Buzz! A whirlwind rose up in front of them. It was as if a mountain was pressing down on the space. The mountain was like a sword, and its momentum was uniform. The blunt sword had no edge, and it was extremely heavy. Then, the 6th floor of the sword pagoda lit up and 46 swords shot out. Bei Doi stood under the sword pagoda with his hands supporting the sky. His clothes were torn inch by inch, and his bronze skin was full of power. It was as if he was going to lift the entire sword pagoda. When 2 sword shadows appeared on a window on the 6th floor, Bei Doi was so tired that he sat on the ground. The great path heavenly wheel disappeared from his body. 6th floor, 47 swords. Who is this person? A controller from outside the outer realm asked in surprise. He had made one more sword than Nangong Miao. "This is the grandson of the celestial lord from the deity realm, Bei Doi," someone shouted. "We congratulate the celestial lord." Izun's cultivation is still shallow, but his future is limitless, everyone said. "My grandson is not talented. You all are too kind." The celestial lord smiled politely. He waved his hand and sent a wisp of divine power into Bei Doi's body. Bei Doi recovered to his peak state like Nangong Miao. He stood up from the ground and returned to the celestial lord's side. His face was full of pride. "Congratulations, celestial lord," Nan said indifferently. Headmaster Nan said indifferently. This Big Dipper righteousness actually had one more sword strike than his disciple, Nangong Miao. However, Bei Doi had reached his limit just now. In reality, Nangong Miao was not much weaker. Nan's disciple is also extraordinary. "Congratulations," the celestial lord replied. Compared to Izun, this junior is clearly inferior. However, the Tao of the sword is still dependent on cultivation. Talent is only a foil. In the future, this junior will work even harder. "I believe Izun is the same," Nangong Xiong said. "If Brother Nangong can accompany me to the academy for this year's sword conference, Bei Doi naturally wouldn't dare to slack off." Bei Doi smiled, as if he and Nangong Miao had already been chosen by the academy. Today, tens of thousands of sword cultivators from the seamless world have gathered here. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Perhaps the true monstrous geniuses are still behind us. However, if I can really enter the academy with Izun, I would feel even more honored. When Nangong Miao said this, his gaze landed on the group from the western capital. He looked at Si Huan, who was beside Daisakong. It's a pity that Izun is unable to walk side by side with us. Sigh. You. Si Huan's eyes darkened. Nangong Xiong's words seemed to have other meanings. Was he doing this on purpose? Was he afraid that the people from the divine realm would forget that he had a fatal illness? My Izun has Tianyang Kenshin's blood flowing in his veins. What's the point of entering the academy or not? If he wants to learn the academy's sword Dao divine abilities, he can learn them at home. He's not like some people who don't have a good background. They struggle and struggle their entire lives, but in the end, they might not even have the chance to learn. Sigh. We're both from the divine realm, but why is the difference so enviable? Qin Hao said sarcastically with his hands behind his back. As soon as he said this, the sword-ask pagoda area was filled with sighs. His words were crude but reasonable. This fellow seemed to admit that Si Huan's talent was not good, but what he said was reasonable. After all, he had an extraordinary sword god as his father, Tianyang Kenshin. Other than the Divine Master, he was currently the only two peerless experts in the entire seamless world who had forged an immortal-grade heavenly wheel. Moreover, Tianyang Kenshin's potential was boundless. As his father, he was so strong. What other people spent their entire lives trying to obtain, his son could easily obtain. So, was there a need to work hard? Tianyang Kenshin is the role model of our seamless world. As the dean of the academy, he maintains order in the divine realm on behalf of the divine master. He's definitely not a selfish person, Nangong Miao said in a sharp voice. His expression changed. His state of mind was obviously stimulated by Qin Hao. Thinking about it carefully, it was not wrong. No matter how proud Nangong Miao was, how could he not want Tianyang Kenshin as his father? Unfortunately, he did not have that fate. Didn't Daisakong recruit some talents recently? Why don't the sword cultivators of the West Capital want to try their luck at the sword-ask pagoda? Dean Nan changed the topic. As one of the big shots of the divine realm, his status was illustrious. However, in terms of potential, he was indeed inferior to Daisakong's son, Tianyang Kenshin. What Dean Nan wants to see. Why don't you let him broaden his horizons? All guards of the West Capital, listen up. Wuk is a heavenly mandate sword cultivator that is hard to come by in 10,000 years. Seriously feel his control over sword intent. This kind of opportunity is hard to come by, Daisakong ordered majestically. Yes, Lord Sikong, Zhang Ji and the others shouted back, their voices shaking the heavens. Exaggerated. Dean Nan revealed an angry expression. Heavenly mandate sword cultivator? Who dared to call themselves a heavenly mandate sword cultivator? Chapter 2053. Being born as a sword was the mandate of heaven. Today, all the sword cultivators in the sword-seeking pagoda were qualified to be called mandate sword cultivators. They came from all over the infinite divine region. Which one of them wasn't a one-in-a-million genius? Of course, from a local perspective, they were qualified. However, with so many geniuses gathered in the divine region, who would dare to call themselves mandate of heaven and treat the thousands of geniuses as heir? Dean Nan thought that Daisakong was exaggerating and didn't take everyone seriously. Mandate sword cultivator. Qin Hao rubbed his nose and smiled. At present, among all the sword cultivators he knew, Wuk was indeed worthy of the title mandate of heaven. Even compared to God Lu and the son of the Dragon Lord, Wuk didn't seem inferior. At this moment, many cultivators' eyes fell on Wuk. Their eyes were sharp, and their faces were full of dissatisfaction. They wanted to see what was so special about Wuk. Wuk walked forward with a calm expression. His state of mind wasn't affected by the outside world at all. Since the moment he started learning the sword, he was incomparably firm in his own path. He never cared about others' opinions. Wisps of sword aura flowed from his body. Flawless, he was like a sharp sword that gradually approached the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda. His calm footsteps landed, and the pervasive sword will of all things resonated with the ancient pagoda. This space was filled with pure power of the will of the great path. It was so clean. Faintly, the sound of a sword could be heard in everyone's ears. It was like a pulsating musical note with a kind of magical power. It actually caused everyone's sword souls to vibrate slowly. Buzz. The green ancient pagoda suddenly flashed with divine light. The light spread from the bottom to the fourth floor. For a moment, the shadows of divine swords appeared from the 9 ancient windows. It was so fast that it was as if they were born at this moment. Fourth floor, 36 swords. So fast. Many people were surprised. Their expressions became solemn. The way they looked at Wuk changed. From the previous suspicion, indifference, and even contempt, they suddenly became serious. They instantly realized that Wuk was different. Prince Lingbo was the descendant of a great divine Dao clan and the next ruler of the heavenly Dao. He had even forged the heavenly wheel, but he had only lit up the 3rd floor of the ancient pagoda and triggered 27 swords. The moment Wuk released his sword will, he directly lit up the 4th floor of the ancient pagoda, surpassing Prince Lingbo's 9 swords. What kind of difference was there between the two? Could it be that this was another exceptional sword cultivator who was on par with the southern courtyard's Nangong Miao and the heavenly venerable's grandson, Big Dippery? Interesting. Big Dippery said. He could not help but look at Wuk more seriously. Nangong Miao was the same. Previously, Wuk had defeated a 7-winged fighter of the same cultivation level. The entire process could be said to have been one-sided, and it was truly a stunning scene on Big Dipper Mountain. However, at that time, Nangong Miao didn't pay too much attention to it. Within the same realm, there were differences in strength, and it was the same for the divine path. Wuk had defeated 7 wings, but when he forged the heaven's wheel in the future, he might not necessarily defeat Nangong Miao. But things were completely different now. The swordsman-esque pagoda contained the will of a divine lord, and it bore the weight of the celestial might of the seamless realm. Every single one of the divine swords enshrined within it was a perfect treasure for testing sword cultivators. The recognition of every divine sword represented the upper limit of a person's talent. Now Wuk had just released his sword will, and he had immediately activated 36 swords. It was clear that he was talented. If this scene made everyone calm, then in the next second, there was a series of exclamations. As the distance between Wuk and the ancient pagoda shortened, the surging sword will on his body became more and more intense. A resplendent lotus of the great Tao bloomed. Instantly, the bottom of the pagoda shone with boundless golden light. In the air, there seemed to be thousands of swords shooting out, all flying into the ancient pagoda. Boom! The green ancient pagoda shook. The divine light actually filled the 5th floor, not stopping at all. It climbed to the 6th floor, and 54 sword shadows appeared. What? Someone's eyes widened as he cried out involuntarily. 54 swords. The divine swords on every floor have been activated by him. Quickly, feel it. This person is still releasing Emperor's will. He's a Nirvana realm cultivator, and he hasn't even forged the heaven's wheel. How is this possible? Amidst the exclamations, the faces of countless sword geniuses from all over the seamless realm were distorted. If Wuk had stepped into the divine path, forged the heaven's wheel, and activated 54 swords, everyone would feel better and could accept it. This was because the heaven's wheel could connect with the heavenly path, and from there, one could sense the divine will of the Divine Master on a deeper level. This depended on one's understanding of the Sword Tao. But Wuk? This guy hadn't stepped into the Divine Gate yet, but a Nirvana Sword Emperor who hadn't forged the Heaven's Wheel had activated 50 Divine Soldier of the Divine Master with just the Sword Soul in his Sword Soul. Was he still human? Interesting. Goddess Qingrong smiled. She looked at Wuk and her tone was very calm. But when this calm tone came from Qingrong, the meaning was completely different from the Big Dipper E. Senior sister, this person's Sword Tao is so strong. A female disciple of the Eastern Immortal Heaven said. Her small mouth was wide open and she was very shocked. It's indeed extraordinary. Moreover, the power of his sword will is still rising, resonating with the sword-seeking pagoda. It hasn't stopped. Another female disciple who was slightly older said seriously. Everyone looked over. At this moment, Wuk's entire body was covered in golden sword chi. The sword lotus wrapped around him, and the majestic power of the sword Tao surged wildly as the petals unfolded. There seemed to be no end to it. Strands of golden sword light were injected into the ancient pagoda. The light passed through the 6th level and reached the 7th level. When this scene appeared, even Headmaster Nan and the Big Dipper Skylord couldn't maintain their calm. Their state of mind was shaken. Wuk's talent is actually so monstrous. I've never noticed it before. Zhang San was dumbfounded. If he forged the Heaven's Wheel, how strong would it be? It's indeed not bad. Daisakong smiled and used Headmaster Nan's tone to praise. Although it was intentional, it was also true. Wuk's talent had exceeded his expectations. It was even more outstanding than he had imagined. This guy. Qin Hao curled his lips slightly. Wuk was in the limelight again. Buzz. On the 7th level of the sword-seeking pagoda, after receiving the influx of Wuk's sword will, the images of divine swords kept appearing on the windows. 1, 2, 3. Every time a divine sword appeared, it caused the hearts of the swordsmen of the endless world to violently tremble. 58, 59, 60. It's already the 62nd sword, someone said with a trembling voice. A mere Nirvana Sword Emperor was able to trigger the 62nd sword of a divine master. How shocking was that? Moreover, he was only one sword away from reaching the peak of the 7th level. Next, would this swordsman of the West Capital rush to the 8th level? Everyone held their breaths and stared at the ancient pagoda, so much so that they neglected Wuk's own condition. Right now, almost no one cared about who was triggering the pagoda. Their attention was all locked on the 8th level, staring at the light waves. They wanted to witness the miracle that would happen. Swish. Just then, the divine light that enveloped the 7th level of the sword-seeking pagoda retreated. When the last window lit up, the ancient pagoda instantly returned to its green color. This. Everyone was stunned. Their gazes slowly moved downwards, looking at the figure standing at the bottom of the pagoda. Wuk was covered in sweat. Like Nangong Miao and 7-Star E, he seemed to have gone through an intense battle. His face was full of fatigue. Many people sighed. Was it finally going to end here? However, without forging the heavenly wheel and just using the Nirvana sword will to trigger 63 swords, this swordsman of the West Capital was enough to look down on everyone. His future achievements would definitely not be low. Why did you stop? Qin Hao saw Wuk return and quietly asked. Wuk should still have some energy left. I can't reach the 8th level, Wuk said weakly. He did indeed have one sword force that he hadn't released. It was the sword spirit of the Juying sword master. However, he could feel that the sword force released by Juying was still not enough to rush to the 8th level of the sword-seeking pagoda. Because that level was not something a sword emperor could reach. It was outside the pattern. Perhaps when he forged the heavenly wheel, he would have a chance. Qin Hao nodded silently. Since Wuk said so, The 7th level of the sword-seeking pagoda should be the limit of a sword emperor. If he wanted to go further, he would have to rely on his divine power. You've worked hard. Daisakong gave Wuk a gratified smile. A ray of sword radiance shot out from his fingertip and entered Wuk's body. Suddenly, Wuk felt that his weak body was absorbed by a majestic sword force. The exhausted Dilly quickly recovered and quickly returned to his best state. "Thank you, Senior Sikong," Wuk said. "You don't have to thank me. Kid, your talent is far beyond my imagination. You've brought me quite a surprise. Today, the Nirvana Sword Field of the Academy and the West Capital are in the bag," Daisakong said generously. As soon as these words came out, it was as if the ending of the sword-seeking pagoda had been decided. Everyone was shocked. The Celestial Lord nodded silently at Wuk as if to affirm. Daisakong came from the academy and used to be a page boy of the Holy Land. Now, he was the Lord of the West Capital and one of the 4 giants of the Divine Realm. Since he dared to say so, there would be no other accident. In fact, even if Daisakong did not say so, who in the Nirvana realm dared to challenge Wuk to a sword competition after witnessing him activate the 63 swords of the Divine Master? Not to mention the Nirvana realm of the Emperor, many people in the Divine Path were also afraid of Wuk. At least now, Dean Nan and Nangong Miao's faces were very ugly. "Is this kid a monster?" Ching Huai whispered. Previously, when 7 Wings was crushed, Wuk showed his powerful swordsmanship. Now, it seemed that his actual ability was even stronger. Perhaps he did not use much strength to defeat 7 Wings that day. Thinking about this, Nangong Miao's mood became even more chaotic. His hands were trembling secretly. Before, he had never put Wu Kei in his eyes, but now, he had no choice but to think highly of him. He even began to doubt whether he would still be able to fight if Wu Kei was able to cast the Sky Wheel. Without casting the Sky Wheel, you lit up the 7th floor of the Sword Pagoda and activated 63 divine weapons of the Divine Master. If you cast the Sky Wheel, in the 10,000 years of cultivation, no one here would dare to take a blow from you. You would be invincible. The presumptuous evaluation was full of praise. An old man in his 60s walked out of the crowd with a straight posture. He held a horsetail whisk in his hand and carried a Taoist sword on his shoulder. He gave off an ethereal feeling and slowly walked toward the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda in front of him. "Who is this person?" "I don't know." Some people pointed at the old man in disgust. "Humph, there are so many geniuses in the Great Path Sword Realm. There is always a taller mountain." "Don't talk nonsense," Dean Nan shouted at the back of the old swordsman. "Senior, you are right. I am just expressing my personal opinion. Moreover, according to my own judgment, among all the Sky Wheels here, there is no one who can defeat that young man. Even if there is, there will be no more than 2, and one of them is me." The old swordsman turned back and smiled. After that, he continued to walk forward. "This guy is crazy. More than crazy. He is too crazy. Does he think he can do better than the swordsman of the West Capital?" Everyone was dissatisfied. Judging from his age, the old swordsman should not be young. Perhaps he had reached the limit of one pattern. At this age, if the Sky Wheel was not extraordinary, it was impossible for him to light up the 8th floor of the Sword Pagoda. Moreover, if he had really lit up the pagoda, then he was definitely not a nobody. But why did none of the swordsmen present know him? He was most likely a dissolute person. Qin Hao stared at the old swordsman. This person's tone was indeed a little arrogant, but it seemed that he was right. If Wuk stepped into the divine path, among the Sky Wheels with one pattern, there were indeed 2 people present who had a chance to defeat Wuk. Qin Hao was one of them. As for the other, even Qin Hao could not figure out who it was. However, how dare this old swordsman say that he could defeat Wuk? Happy New Year, book friends! Chapter 2054. Under the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda, the old swordsman walked forward step by step. Everyone looked at him curiously. Qin Hao and Wuk felt the same. This person was arrogant. They wondered if he could surpass Wuk and light up the 8th level of the ancient pagoda. The old swordsman released wisps of sword will. Thousands of wisps seemed to appear on his body and floated up. The swordsmanship-seeking pagoda sensed the sword will sweeping over. The divine swords in the pagoda immediately reacted, emitting waves of sword judgment. Buzz! The green sword pagoda glowed with divine light. It was powerful. It soared into the sky like raging waves sweeping through the clouds. It directly climbed to the 5th level. Receiving the influx of sword will, the divine swords in the pagoda vibrated at an extremely high frequency. When the power spread out from the outside, the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda seemed to be shrouded in a turbulent sound wave. The space buzzed. The swordsmen were shocked. This person's sword will was so fierce. An expert. One of the heavenly Tao overseers said. The Northern Dipper Heavenly Venerable, Sikong One, Fairy Qing Rong, and Dean Nan all had solemn looks in their eyes as they stared at the old man below the tower with sharp gazes. This person was indeed extraordinary. Perhaps he wasn't bluffing just now. Rise! The old swordsman shouted. He stood under the pagoda and pointed his sword upward. Dense sword light burst out from his fingertips, turning into turbulent streams of light that soared into the sky. For a moment, the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda shook. The sword sound in the void roared. The light rose, spreading over the 6th level and rushing to the 7th. Impressive. Wuk thought to himself. He couldn't help but feel surprised. He had tried to resonate with a divine master's divine weapon before, so he knew how difficult it was. However, the old swordsman had easily reached the same height as Wuk just now. This person was indeed an expert. There were indeed dragons and tigers hidden under the surface of the Great Path Sword Realm. Previously, the Pang family of Zhongzhou State had met Mu Zhan, who had entered the sword through killing. Wuk was surprised at that time. Today, he had probably met another extraordinary person. However, this old swordsman was filled with divine will. He was a sword god cultivator. Using divine will to attack the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda was naturally easier than Wuk using emperor will. Qin Hao looked ahead and felt the aura of the divine will emitted by the old sword cultivator. He couldn't help but frown slightly. He realized that the old man's divine will seemed to be different from other supreme Tao warriors. As for what exactly was different, he couldn't tell. In short, this person was a little strange. Little fellow Taoist, watch carefully. If you want to go to the 8th level, you must rely on the heavenly wheel. Of course, what I can do now, you can also do in the future. The old swordsman's back was facing the crowd, as if he was speaking to Wuk. After he finished speaking, a sword-shaped radiance bloomed from the old swordsman's body. It was glaring, and threads of divine power flowed along his meridians. It was like a great path that connected his limbs and bones. However, it was a pity that the old sword Xiu's divine power couldn't penetrate through his entire body. There were many parts that weren't contaminated, and those parts that weren't contaminated by the radiance of the sky wheel were like plain gaps that were exposed to everyone's vision. Divine power couldn't reach them, and that was the Achilles heel of a strong martial artist of the divine path. Holy Sky Wheel. Qin Hao was stunned. Just like Nangong Miao and 7-Star Righteousness, it was just a great sky wheel. However, the strength of the sword essence flowing in the old swordsman's sky wheel was far beyond the limit of what a holy sky wheel should have. Nangong Miao and 7-Star Righteousness couldn't compare at all. Faintly, Qin Hao could feel a pressure that only a celestial sky wheel could have. Why was it so strange? Boom! The divine light of the sky wheel erupted, and the sword essence released by the old swordsman became extremely violent. Endless sword essence rose from where he stood, becoming more and more turbulent, forming a terrifying storm of sword chi. At the same time, the radiance on the 7th level of the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda rose again to the 8th level, and the shadows of divine swords appeared on all 9 windows. 72 swords, how can he be so strong? Nangong Miao's face changed greatly, and he looked at the old swordsman with some shock in his eyes. They were both strong martial artists of the divine path, and their heavenly wheels were of the same grade. Even the old swordsman's cultivation was not much stronger than his, but this burst of sword essence was not at the same level at all. This feeling, could it be? Daisakong's pupils shrank slightly, and he felt a familiar aura from the old swordsman's sword essence. At this moment, he could understand. No wonder the old swordsman's sword essence was so shocking. It's too scary. There's no way to fight against it at all. Prince Lingbo, as well as many strong martial artists with one pattern of heavenly wheels, retreated uncontrollably because the sword essence in front of them was too strong. Facing the old swordsman, they felt as if they were facing a sword god with 3 patterns of cultivation. However, the old swordsman's heavenly wheel only had 1 pattern, and he was in the same situation as them. He hasn't stopped yet. With this momentum, is he going to rush to the 9th level? Some people had already covered their foreheads with their hands. The sword essence was too strong and too dazzling, and even strong martial artists of the divine path could not look directly at it. At this moment, Loi, who was beside Qing Rong, had traces of light flowing in her eyes, as if her fighting spirit was flickering. She looked up at the swordsmanship-seeking pagoda, and directly at the storm of sword essence soaring into the sky. She had originally thought that she would not meet anyone who was qualified to be her opponent in this Academy Sword Conference. Even if there was, it would only be the silver-haired youth from the West Capital. But she had not expected to meet him now, and it was not Qin Hao. Sword, come! A deep roar exploded from the front, and the sword essence lit up the 8th level. Even though he had released the heavenly wheel of the Great Path, the old swordsman was still struggling. He knew very well that he could not rush to the 9th level just like this, so he had to sacrifice his life spirit. Swoosh! The long sword on his back was unsheathed, and it flew out in a flash of light, spinning and hiding in the old swordsman's heavenly wheel. With this, the radiance of his heavenly wheel suddenly became even brighter, and a mighty force swept out, radiating toward the sky. The storm seemed to have been injected with a majestic force, and it roared and surged violently upward. Life weapon. Someone blurted out. When the life spirit entered the weapon, it would be refined into a divine soldier, and it was the so-called life weapon. When a warrior entered the Emperor realm, he would have this ability, and he could refine his life spirit into a weapon, which was far more powerful than other divine soldier. However, when the weapon was connected to one's life, once the weapon was destroyed, the person would basically be gone. So, even though people knew that life weapons were very powerful, very few people would try to refine them. But in front of them, there was a sword god who had refined his life spirit into a divine soldier, which really shocked everyone. Interesting. The corner of Qin Hao's mouth twitched slightly. This old man was really bold. However, with the support of the life weapon, perhaps he could really rush to the 9th level. Boom! There was a strong roar between heaven and earth, and the ancient pagoda shook, and the earth shook with it. Almost as soon as Qin Hao's voice fell, the 9th level that almost no one had broken through was finally covered by a ray of light. Oh my God! Among the people present, some cultivators from the domain of the gods were so shocked that they almost fainted. The 9th level of the Sword Quest Pagoda had lit up. At the same time, in a magnificent divine temple inside the academy, Sword God Severing Love stepped out, and his gaze seemed to penetrate the void and see the situation here. Next, vicissitudes of life walked out of the divine temple one after another and came to Severing Love's side, standing in a row. Headmaster Nan spoke, his expression turning serious. Originally, before coming to the academy, he had great confidence in Nangong Miao. He believed that this disciple of his would have a chance to enter the academy. However, after seeing Li Guangxing's performance and sensing the frost divine will emitted from Loi, the confidence in Headmaster Nan's heart was blown away. His disciple Nangong Miao was most likely going to be in danger. Go! Loi stretched out her palm and blasted out a palm strike. As white frost filled the air, countless sword sounds flowed upwards from her position, sweeping towards the Sword Quest Pagoda. Buzz! A rhythmic sound came from the ancient pagoda, and light reappeared. Starting from the first floor, it quickly spread upwards. The speed was even faster than when Li Guangxing was in the Sword Quest Pagoda. In the blink of an eye, it had reached the height of the 6th floor. A sword shadow flashed on the windows of every floor. 54 swords. So powerful. Someone was shocked. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, they wouldn't have believed the scene in front of them. The moment the sword will was released, it directly lit up the 6th floor of the ancient pagoda. Was this a monster? Grandpa, who is that? Bei Doi pointed at Loi. The Skylord frowned, deep in thought. However, he didn't remember seeing Loi in the Eastern Divine Heaven. He shouldn't have not heard of such an outstanding disciple. Unless the Dongxing Immortal Lord purposely concealed her and hid her. I don't know, but this child's attainments in swordsmanship are extraordinary. If you meet her in the sword discourse arena, remember not to provoke her. The Skylord reminded Bei Doi. The fact that she was proficient in the frost divine will of the Dongxing Immortal Lord was enough to prove something. Just look at Qing Rong. She must be another personal disciple of the Dongxing Immortal Lord. The divine realm is indeed full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers, Li Guangxing said, looking at Loi with a cautious gaze. He also came here with the confidence that he would definitely win and enter the academy. However, Loi's appearance was like a protruding stone on a flat road. He could feel that her swordsmanship was extraordinary and shouldn't be below his. If he really encountered such an opponent, what should he do? Should he go around the protruding stone or take the risk to step on it and flatten it? Elder brother is right. I'm afraid you've really met your match, Qin Hao said happily. Li Guangxing's heavenly wheel had a single mark, and it just so happened that his cultivation was on the same level as Loi's. Just looking at the grade of the heavenly wheel, Li Guangxing was indeed inferior. However, how could someone who could light up the 9th floor of the ancient pagoda and trigger 80 swords be simple? At this moment, Qin Hao was a little curious. If Li Guangxing and Loi were to fight, who would win?